Chapter 552. Just as Reynolds was wondering if he should treat the governor's mansion like a zoo and go in for a stroll, he suddenly saw two figures entering the church. "We have guests. And they are two very beautiful guests. The man is so handsome, just a little bit less handsome than me. That little girl is quite cute too. She looks like a doll." Seeing that the two were dressed in luxurious clothes and had an extraordinary temperament, he thought that they were rich people, so he quickly greeted them warmly. "Hello, welcome to Mia's church. May the goddess protect you." But just as he finished speaking, he saw that the two beautiful guests had a shocked expression on their faces, as if they had just seen a ghost. "You! How can you see us?" the silver-haired man asked in surprise. The Dragon Clan's special stealth technique was not some kind of magic or technique, but more like an innate ability of their race. It was a unique power that came from their bloodline, similar to an instinct. The specific effect was not to deceive the eyes but to reduce one's presence. Their bodies were so huge and their strength was so powerful, but they were so good at hiding. It might sound ironic, but it was not contradictory. Just like how cats were the top hunters in the natural world, they were also good at hiding. As an existence at the top of the food chain, this was a very important ability. Theoretically speaking, even a human legendary powerhouse would find it difficult to see through the dragon's concealment ability. That was why the two dragons were so surprised. Could it be that this young-looking human in front of them was a demigod? But didn't the elders in our clan say that there would not be any demigods here? There won't even be any legends who can threaten us. Before we landed, we carefully checked the situation in the city. Indeed, we didn't sense anything that could pose a threat to us. Then what's up with this human in front of us? A lot of thoughts appeared in the minds of the two dragons in an instant, and they wanted to escape on the spot. The elders in their clan had said that humans were very dangerous creatures, and they must be extra careful when they come into contact with them. Normal humans were usually gentler and did not pose much of a threat. However, those human champions were greedy and cruel. They loved to hunt down high-level creatures in the natural world and use their fur, bones, and organs to make equipment and weapons. If it was not for the Dragon Clan's powerful stealth ability, they would not have been able to escape from their clutches. They were not the same species as normal humans at all. If they hadn't repeatedly confirmed that there were no terrifying human powerhouses in Sinless City and that this matter was related to the future of the dragon race, the two dragons wouldn't have come to a place like Sinless City. Reynolds looked at the two people's shocked expressions and asked suspiciously, "What's the matter? What's wrong with you guys? Did I say something wrong?" Then, he continued to speculate on his own. "Or are you tourists from other places? Are you not used to the hospitality here because this is your first time in the Sinless City? That must be it. I'm such an elegant and easygoing person. How could I scare you? Don't be afraid, it'll be fine. Our Sinless City is just like that. The people are simple and warm." After saying that, he casually cast a soothing divine spell on the two dragons in an attempt to ease their tension. The two dragons suddenly felt an irresistible drowsiness. Although they were nervous, their eyelids kept fighting. Dragons were naturally fond of sleeping. They could sleep for a few years for no reason. The soothing divine spell that Reynolds cast was much stronger than that of a normal priest. With the two of them added together, even the powerful dragons couldn't resist it. They tried to struggle, but they couldn't resist at all. In the end, they fell straight to the ground. *T, we've fallen into the human's trap. We're going to be skinned alive. That was the last thought that flashed through the two dragons' minds. They fell asleep just like that. What the hell? Why did they fall asleep just like that? Reynolds felt a little helpless. Aren't these two people a little too strange? So he quickly went back to find the old bishop and asked where the two people were. The old bishop followed him to take a look, but he couldn't see the two people at all. "Where are the people you were talking about? Aren't they right here? They're so big, and one of them is a cute little girl in white silk." Can't you see them? The old bishop was stunned. He reached out to touch Reynolds' forehead. Reynolds also reached out to touch his forehead. The old bishop suddenly thought of something. He quickly let Reynolds take his hand and led him to touch the little girl's head. It wasn't until there was physical contact that the old bishop saw the little girl lying in the yard. She was sleeping soundly with a hammerhead shark plushie in her arms. When he took his hand away, the little girl immediately disappeared from his sight. Dragon? He asked in surprise. You call this a dragon? Reynolds found it funny. He reached out to poke the little girl's soft face and laughed. What kind of dragon is this? The old bishop had no choice but to explain to Reynolds the dragon's shape-shifting and invisibility abilities. He then found an old, yellowed book that looked like a monster illustration book from the underground library and flipped through it for Reynolds. This is really a dragon? Reynolds was also shocked. As he compared the description in the book, he lowered his head to look at the soft little lowly. But didn't you say that dragons are very powerful? Then why did they fall asleep when they saw me? He followed up with another question. The old bishop was stumped. He was stunned for a while before he forced himself to explain. Well, didn't the book say that dragons love to sleep? They spend most of their lives sleeping. They can sleep whenever and wherever they want. And isn't this behavior of sleeping in someone else's house exactly the behavior of the strong? Do you dare to sleep in Mithran's house or Undine's house? Reynolds thought about it and shook his head. He really didn't dare. He would be hated if he went to a girl's house to sleep. Then how do I ride a dragon like this? Reynolds asked again. He tried to grab the little girl's two childish ponytails. Don't think about these weird things. Be careful that she doesn't bite you to death when she wakes up. The old archbishop threatened in a stern voice and continued, Don't worry. Let's bring them back to the church first. The book also said that most dragons are friendly, so, when the two dragons finally woke up in the afternoon, they found themselves tightly bound by heavy chains. They tried to struggle, but the chains that were glowing were exceptionally strong. They had been enchanted with countless hardening spells. Even with the strength of the dragons, they couldn't break free. They were doomed. They were going to be skinned alive by the ferocious human powerhouse. How helpless! Chapter 553. The two dragons were instantly disheartened. Although the dragon race was powerful and had enormous physical strength and various magical abilities, the prerequisite was that they had to be in their dragon form to be able to use them. However, these two dragons were in their human form for the sake of convenience. The two of them did not expect to meet such a despicable human who would sleep with them the moment they met. Right now, they were tightly bound by these incomparably sturdy chains and could not return to their original forms. However, even in their human form, they could still use the dragon race's unique raving magic. Therefore, in order to save themselves, the two dragons began to chant ravings in an attempt to escape. However, at this moment, Reynolds realized that they were awake and were still shouting something, so he quickly walked over. Before the two dragons could finish chanting, their mouths were roughly stuffed with a hot thing. It was a freshly roasted potato, and it was fragrant. However, it was too hot originally. This temperature was nothing in their dragon form. Unfortunately, the two dragons were now in their human form, so they were immediately scalded to the point that tears were about to flow out. You must be hungry, right? It's fine, it's fine. Eat a potato first before you talk. Reynolds said very enthusiastically. This human is so sinister, so vicious. Not only did he ambush us, but he also used such torture to torture us. The two dragons' last means of resistance was blocked, so they could only curse in their hearts. However, they did not expect that this human would have an even more outrageous method. Why aren't you eating? Can't you swallow it? Aren't your mouths very big? Reynolds said with some doubt. He went to find a shiny kitchen knife and approached them step by step. They were going to be skinned. They were going to be skinned alive bit by bit. How frightening and cruel was this human being! He actually wanted to skin them alive? The two dragons looked at the shiny blade and were so scared that they started to cry on the spot. However, Reynolds's knife did not land on the two of them. Instead, he took the potatoes from their mouths and cut them into small pieces that were easy to swallow. The two dragons could not help but be stunned, and they could not understand his actions. What is he doing? Is he going to use the potatoes to hint at our fate? Cut us into pieces? The two dragons who were scared silly began to let their imaginations run wild. But then, they saw Jean Long pick up a small piece of potato with a knife and fork and put it in front of the little loli's mouth. Come, let's eat. I roasted it myself. It's very fragrant. The little loli's eyes were filled with tears. Her big eyes seemed to be blinking as she swallowed the potato in humiliation. It was tasteless and she could not taste anything. She was just worried that this cruel human would take the opportunity to stab the knife into her mouth. Luckily, I didn't. Reynolds then fed the silver dragon another lump. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. Since you've eaten my food, you won't bite me, right? What kind of strange logic was this? Of course we want to bite you, we want to bite you to death. Just as the two dragons were silently cursing, they heard Reynolds continue. I don't have any good points, but I'm very popular with small animals. Usually, when I feed them something, they'll quickly become familiar with me. So don't stand on ceremony. Come, as he spoke, he forked another potato and fed it to the two dragons. Are you treating us like kittens and puppies? This despicable human. I'm so angry. Just like that, Reynolds patiently fed all the potatoes into the two dragons' stomach. Then, he revealed a very happy and kind smile. He patted their heads and said, good boy. By the way, since you can transform into humans, you should be able to speak the human language, right? The two dragons looked at each other and saw the determination and perseverance in each other's eyes. There was nothing to say to such a cruel enemy. They would definitely not beg for mercy. We are proud dragons. Even if we were to become prisoners, we would still maintain our pride and dignity. When Reynolds saw that they were ignoring him, he could only shake his head regretfully and sigh. Can't speak? What a pity! As he spoke, he dragged a chair from the side and sat on it. He began to think about how to deal with the two dragons. He also took the hammerhead shark plushie that the little loli brought and played with it in his hand. The little loli saw that this guy was not only going to harm her, but also the plushie that she had taken a fancy to. She was a little anxious and could not help but speak. Using her crisp and delicate voice, she said, "Give me back fishy." Eh? So you can speak? Then that's easy. We can communicate. My name is Reynolds. I'm the priest here. What about you? Reynolds said in surprise. The two dragons could not help but be stunned. They had never heard of the name Reynolds. Before they set off, some elders in the clan who liked to go out and secretly observe the humans told them the names of a few powerhouses on the human side. They were at least legendary or even demigod names. They also asked the two of them not to provoke such existences as it would be very dangerous. With the dragon's memory, the two dragons of course remembered those names, but there was no one named Reynolds. Is it a fake name? He did not dare to reveal his real name because he was afraid of being cursed? This guy is not only vicious, but also very cunning. Unfortunately, we are dragons full of wisdom. We can easily see through such tricks. The two dragons thought to themselves as they also reported their current names. I'm Alice Lowe. I'm Ince. Of course, their dragon names were not like that. It was a long string of gibberish that could not be translated, so the names they reported were also fake names. However, Reynolds did not care about that. Instead, he said warmly, "Nice to meet you. Nice to meet all of you. Welcome to Mia's cult." Is this your welcome ceremony? Silver Dragon Ince looked down at the chains on his body and said in annoyance. No, I'm just afraid that you'll bite me. You two fell asleep for no reason. As far as I know, dragons are very irritable when their sleep is disturbed. I'm just trying to ensure my own safety so that I won't be bitten by you. Reynolds still vaguely remembered that when he was in his hometown, he often hunted all kinds of dragons. Some of them would run back to sleep in front of him halfway through the hunt. If he woke them up at that time, they would become very violent and difficult to deal with. So, it was absolutely necessary to take some safety measures. However, the two dragons could not understand his concerns. Weren't you the one who hypnotized us? How did it become us who fell asleep? Chapter 554. And why do we have to bite people when we wake up? What do you take us for? Reynolds did not care about how the two dragons would look at him. He even ignored their angry gazes. They were dragons after all. Their gazes were very fierce. This was very reasonable. All right, since we can communicate, let's talk properly. Age, occupation, motive and purpose of coming here. Tell me all about it. I'm 233 years old. He just turned 200 years old. Alice said. We're here to find the future path of our race. Ince added. This was not a secret. It did not matter if they said it out loud. So the two dragons were quite happy to tell him. Wow. You're actually over 200 years old? Reynolds could not help but say in surprise. He took a closer look at the cute blonde lowly with white hair in double ponytails. She was so cute. How could she be so old? What a pity, we're still in our infancy, Alice muttered in dissatisfaction. Because the fertility rate was very low and the incubation period was very long, they were already the two youngest dragons in the dragon race. Logically speaking, they should not have come out to carry out such an important mission. However, the prophet in the race had asked for it. The two dragons could not figure out the prophet's intention. Reynolds did not care much about their age. He did not hear Alice's dissatisfaction. He continued to talk to himself. Since you're looking for the future of your race, why did you come to our church? We're just strolling around. We've been to many places in the city. Alice answered truthfully. Reynolds thought for a moment. It seemed that there were no other questions worth paying attention to. So, he quickly asked the question that he was most concerned about. Can you let me ride you? Ride? You? What are you trying to do? Alice's cute little face suddenly flushed red. As an existence at the top of the food chain, the dragon race's understanding of the concept of riding was obviously not the same as humans. They would not ride anything, nor would they be ridden by anything. To them, riding was an action that they would only do when they were mating and reproducing. Alice did not expect that this human was not only sinister, but also so vulgar and rude. Moreover, he was a genuine dragon. He was just a puny human being. How could he do such a thing? Ince couldn't care less about being skinned when he saw Alice being humiliated in such a manner. He immediately roared angrily. You want to ride my sister? I'll fight it out with you. Reynolds was stunned for a moment before he asked, Why are you so angry? How about I ride you instead of her? Ince was originally prepared to chant an incantation to risk his life, but he was shocked by his words. He even choked on his incantation. I'm a male dragon. Reynolds observed the strange reactions of the two dragons and asked in puzzlement, What's the matter? What's wrong with you guys? Why is his reaction so intense? Isn't it just letting me ride it? Why are you so stingy? The two dragons did not know how to comment on this terrifying human. Just kill us! We, the proud dragons, would rather die. I won't tolerate such humiliation. The two dragons said in unison. Then, they saw Reynolds's eyes suddenly light up. The two dragons instantly regretted their decision. Fortunately, the elderly bishop had an apron around his waist and arrived in time with a large basin of something. The thing in the basin looked bloody and mangled. It was a large basin of raw meat. Some strange spices were mixed in it. Mixed with the smell of blood, it emitted a strange smell. The two dragons couldn't help but look at it. What is this? It smells so good. Just smelling it makes me want to eat it, and this smell is so familiar, eh? Are they awake? The elderly bishop asked when he saw Reynolds sitting there alone. He still couldn't see the two dragons. Give this to them. They might like it, the elderly bishop said as he put down the bloody basin. Wow. This smell, who can eat it? Reynolds pinched his nose in disgust. He turned back to look at the two dragons' reaction. Good heavens! They're drooling. It's as if they've been beaten up. Do they like it? This is a recipe an old friend told me. It's said to be very popular with the dragons. The elderly bishop asked again. Reynolds thought for a moment. First, he untied the chains on Alice. At the same time, he grabbed the small wooden hammer and the sea urchin necklace. He felt that Alice was smaller and looked easier to deal with. If she wanted to bite him, he should be able to subdue her. In the end, Alice did not bite him. Instead, she rushed to the pot of raw meat and picked up the fork that the elderly bishop had prepared for her. She picked up a large piece of meat and stuffed it into her mouth, chewing with big mouthfuls. So delicious, her emerald green eyes narrowed slightly, revealing a happy arc. It seemed that she really liked the taste. The temptation of appetite made her forget that she was in danger. It seemed that the taste had awakened the most primitive instinct in her body. Reynolds frowned as he watched. For some reason, he suddenly lost his appetite to ride a dragon. Did they say why they were here? The elderly bishop asked again. They said that they were looking for a path to the future. They were wandering around and accidentally came in. Is that so? As expected. The elderly bishop pondered for a moment before he said, When they're done eating, let them go. Renaud seemed a little reluctant. But they asked me to kill them. The elderly bishop was stunned. What did you do to them? They're still very young, aren't they? They should be just 2 young dragons, right? They're like human children. That's why you easily subdued them. You won't even let the young ones go? As the elderly bishop spoke, he picked up a little kitten that was hiding behind him, carefully sizing up the 2 dragons. Reynolds thought for a moment, sighed regretfully, and loosened the chains on Silver Dragon Ince. But not only did the silver dragon not thank him, it glared at him angrily. Because the basin of meat had been devoured by its sister like a whirlwind. It didn't even get to taste a shred of meat. What was worse was that Alice, who was kneeling on the ground, stretched lazily. Her eyelids drooped and she was about to sleep, so comfortable, beside her. Ince panicked. He hurriedly pounced forward and bit her head. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Alice immediately let out a series of cute squeals. Ince let out an exasperated roar from his stomach. My dear sister, please don't forget our situation. Chapter 555. In the end, the 2 dragons walked out of Mia's cathedral unscathed. However, the elder sister, Avina, was not very willing. Her younger brother, Ince, bit the back of her neck and dragged her out forcefully. The scene looked like a young and handsome silver-haired man running away pathetically with a little loli in his mouth. It was obvious that he had suffered a great shock to the point that he could not disguise himself properly and revealed his true nature. The 2 dragons ran all the way back to the secluded barn where they had been sleeping. When Ince saw that the terrifying human did not chase after them, he heaved a sigh of relief and carefully threw his sister on a pile of straw. However, Avina looked like her soul had left her body. She was still mumbling softly. I still want to eat. Ince was so anxious that he hurriedly knocked his head against the back of her head again and again as he grumbled. Sister, wake up. Don't be tempted by human food. Remember our modesty and pride. Io. But it's really delicious, Avina said disappointedly. When Ince heard that, he was even angrier. He did not even taste a single bite. Why was his fate so tragic to have such an unreliable sister? What do we do now? There's such a dangerous human in this city. The situation is different from what the elders said. What should we do? Continue? Will we meet that guy again? Or something even scarier? Ince asked a bunch of questions in one go. Avina felt a headache coming on. She said lazily, "That's so troublesome. Let's sleep first. Maybe when we wake up, we'll find a solution." "How long do you plan to sleep for?" "Ugh. If you keep talking like this, you won't be able to find a boyfriend in the future." Avina stammered and fell asleep just like that. But I'm a male," Ince mumbled softly. There was nothing he could do about this sister, who slept after eating, however. He was an intelligent dragon after all. After calming down and thinking carefully, he quickly came up with a solution. Thus, he muttered under his breath and activated the special magic of the dragon race. Densely packed words that humans could not understand appeared in the air in front of him. These words twisted and merged with each other, and finally turned into a letter. It recorded the process of this trip and the two dragon whelps' confusion about the future. Then, he cast another spell and summoned a snow-white pigeon out of thin air. It had sharp claws and a sharp beak, and it looked very strong. It was bigger than an eagle, and looked like it could kill a stag with its claws. This was a kind of magical beast called cuckoo pigeon. It got its name because of its special cuckoo-cuckoo sound. It was also called magical stone pigeon. It fed on all kinds of natural stones that were rich in magic power. That was why it was so strong and could fly very far in one go. Ince tied the letter to the strong pigeon's leg and sent it back to the tribe to report the news. As for himself, he lowered his head to look at his sister's peaceful sleeping face. After thinking for a while, he actually laid down beside her and curled up his body, preparing to sleep. Anyway, all he had to do was wait for the family's reply. There was nothing else he could do. Maybe he would be able to think of a way after sleeping. Meanwhile, at Mia's church, Reynolds was still discussing the matter with the old bishop. "Why do you think they will definitely come back?" Reynolds asked the old bishop as he held the two kittens in his arms and guided them to wrestle on his thighs. "Didn't I tell you? They can't resist the temptation of delicious food. Dragons may be arrogant, but they still have some of the instincts of wild beasts, just like humans," the old bishop said confidently. He was very confident about the secret raw meat that he had concocted. Reynolds did not doubt that. He always thought that the old bishop's greatest ability was his theurgy, followed by his culinary skills. On the other hand, he was a little weaker in teaching and educating people. Otherwise, why was he not as good as senior brother? "Then, when they come back, can I ride them?" Reynolds still had not given up on his original intention. He was still thinking of a way. "Why do you always want to ride a dragon? Isn't it enough that you have Amia to ride?" the old bishop asked, puzzled. "Because when I was in my hometown, I usually rode a dragon, and there were all kinds of dragons, red, green, blue, even armored and skeletal dragons. I'm only so persistent because I want to regain more of the feelings and memories of my hometown. And I've ridden Amia too much, I always want to change my mount." "Why don't," as Reynolds spoke, he looked down at the kittens that were still practicing wrestling. The kittens suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of uneasiness. They meowed and fled to the church's entrance. Just then, a beautiful figure appeared there. Was it Merthyrin? She was still dressed in her priestly attire. The slit in her robe was still high, and her legs in white stockings were still eye-catching. The two kittens climbed onto her feet, one on each side, and meowed for shelter. Merthyrin hurriedly picked them up and rubbed them against her face. She said softly, "You're right. Good. You know how to welcome me, die. "Oh no, Bishop Merthyrin, why are you here?" Reynolds came over to greet her. "I was holding a ceremony outside and happened to pass by here, so I came to take a look," Merthyrin whispered, not daring to look Reynolds in the eye. Because she had told a little lie, she did go out to hold a ceremony today, but it was far from here and not on the way at all. She forced herself to take a big detour before passing by Mia's church. "Is that so? What's the matter?" Reynolds asked again. Merthyrin's eyes flashed with a troubled look. she didn't really have anything to do. She just wanted to come over and have a chat with Reynolds. It would be best if they could go to the park again and hold hands. But the book said that girls shouldn't be too direct or too proactive, or they would be hated and despised. So, she couldn't say what was on her mind, and she was too embarrassed to say it. If she came to disturb him when she had nothing to do, she would be hated, right? Fortunately, Reynolds was very understanding and said, "Hee, you're here to freeload, aren't you?" Coincidentally, it was close to dinner time. Mithran's eyes lit up. She nodded and said, "I want your corn. I want to eat your corn." "I see. Then you sit here for a while. I'll go to the market and see if there's any sweet corn for sale," Reynolds said and made a move to leave. "Then I'll," Mithran quickly said. Chapter 556. Unfortunately, Reynolds didn't care about her reaction at all. He simply walked out the door alone. Ugh! Mithran stared at Reynolds's back as he disappeared around the corner, his eyes full of regret and unwillingness. The elderly bishop beside her seized this rare opportunity to give her some advice. "This kid is good at everything, but sometimes his way of thinking is a little strange, a little different from ours. So, why don't you take the initiative and be more direct? You have to hurry up. Don't be fooled by this kid's character. He's actually quite popular." Mithran was taken aback by such advice. She didn't really understand what the elderly bishop meant, and she didn't know what to do, how to take the initiative, how to be direct. She'd better go back and read the books. Coincidentally, her maid at home had helped her borrow 2 books yesterday, on how to cleverly show your charm in front of your boyfriend, what kind of women do good men like. Just as Mithran's thoughts were running wild, Reynolds came back quickly, but he only bought a corn, and he even took a bite out of it. "I tasted it, but it wasn't very sweet, so I only bought this one. I'm sorry, Bishop." "Bishop Mithran, there might not be any corn tonight." Mithran didn't care at all. Her eyes were fixed on the corn cob in Reynolds's hand, and a strange idea suddenly popped into her mind. Should I finish this corn cob with Pastor Reynolds? Using that special method, she still remembered seeing a particularly daring act in a book. A man and a woman, each biting the 2 ends of a chocolate bar, and then starting to eat. As the chocolate bar got shorter and shorter, their faces got closer and closer. The book even used several pictures to accompany the explanation, describing this method in detail. Mithran's heart raced as she read it. Although the corn cob in Reynolds's hand was not a chocolate bar, she could still try, right? Unfortunately, Reynolds didn't give her the chance to try at all. Come, you guys, split this." As he spoke, he shoved the corn cob to the kitten at Mithran's feet. Meow, meow, meow. The little kitten's face was filled with reluctance as it protested in a childish voice. "What's wrong? Have you forgotten my usual teachings? Don't waste food. Otherwise, when you're hungry in the future..." Before Reynolds could finish his sentence, the little kitten was so scared that it started to tremble. It quickly hugged the corn cob with its furry paws and called for its companions to help with this difficult task. "You guys are becoming more and more obedient and sensible. I'm very pleased," Reynolds said contentedly. He let go of the kitten and invited Mithran to sit on the bench next to him. They chatted casually about the events of the past 2 days. However, he did not mention anything about the 2 dragons, because the old bishop had specifically instructed him not to tell anyone about it, lest the 2 dragons be frightened and not dare to return. By the way, the 2 believers that I recently recruited into the church told me that there are changes to this year's Harvest Festival. The Harvest Festival at the end of autumn every year was one of the grand festivals in the Sinless City and even the entire empire. There would be a lively 3-day celebration, with parades, bonfires, fireworks, opera performances, and other activities. But what Reynolds was concerned about was that the Harvest Festival was an excellent opportunity to preach. Many non-believers or shallow believers would consider converting to another religion during the festival in order to get a better harvest in the coming year. Therefore, every year during the harvest festival, the various religions in the sinless city would be active. Old John and his son, for example, had become believers in Mia's religion during the harvest festival a few years ago. Calculating the time, it should be next week. Reynolds was also rubbing his hands together, ready to make a move. He was ready to do something big and earn more believers to join the church. He wanted to ride a dragon, and he also had plans to preach while riding a dragon. How cool would that be? It would be much more impressive than riding Amelia. It would definitely attract a lot of people. However, the two believers, the brothers Tom and Jerry, heard some rumors about the harvest festival through their parents' connections. It was said that the mayor was considering canceling this year's celebration. Probably because of the arrival of the two dragons, the mayor did not dare to make a big fuss about it, fearing that there would be an accident. So, Reynolds wanted to confirm the authenticity of the news with Mithrin. But after listening to his question, Mithrin stood there in a daze. And it was not a normal daze. Her face was red, and she was swaying left and right in a daze. Harvest Festival, according to the books, many young men and women would choose this day to pour out their hearts and gain a sincere relationship. They would go to the celebration together, dance around the bonfire, watch the fireworks together, and finally hug and kiss each other under the oak tree. Hug and kiss with Pastor Reynolds. I'm so looking forward to it. But would it be too intense, too bold? We've never gone to the park together, the kind where we hold hands. Mithrin was thinking about it when she suddenly felt her cheek being poked with a finger. Ah! Mithrin, whose thoughts were suddenly interrupted, let out a cute squeal. She quickly defended herself. No, I'm not thinking about that. Reynolds was stunned and asked suspiciously, "What's wrong? What's wrong with you?" No. Although I'll be busy during the harvest festival, I can still squeeze some time out. I have time every night. Mithrin explained incoherently. But that's not what I'm talking about. Why do I feel like Days is acting weird today? She's dumber than usual. Reynolds could not help but mutter softly. Mithrin did not hear what he was muttering at all. She was still thinking about how to arrange her schedule for the harvest festival. Fortunately, the old bishop finished cooking in time. The three of them were like a family as they enjoyed this warm and delicious dinner. At the dinner table, Reynolds could not help but ask the previous question again. This time, Mithrin was relatively calm. She finally gave the correct response. Uncle Yek seems to have mentioned this before. In previous years, we would have been preparing for the harvest festival by this time, but this year is different. The paladins and crusaders are busy with other things, probably searching for the two dragons. Are they dangerous? What should we do? Mithrin's eyes were full of worry. She was not worried about the two dragons causing any trouble. This was the sinless city, with many powerful people and the protection of the gods. Besides, Reynolds was here, so she was not afraid of anything. Chapter 557. She was just worried that if the harvest festival was cancelled because of this, there would be no celebration. Just like that, the sinless city endured another 3 days under the shadow of the dragon's wings. They didn't feel the joy of the harvest festival at all. The mayor, Bishop Yek, and the other important people were even more anxious. They couldn't eat or sleep in peace if they didn't find those two dragons. They wanted to declare martial law and cancel the harvest festival celebration, but they were worried that it would have the opposite effect. The people would be uneasy and cause even more chaos. What were the two dragons planning to do? What were they scheming in the dark? Would it be hostile to humans? Would canceling the celebration cause a riot? Would holding the celebration as usual cause a disaster? The important figures discussed these questions every day. They quarreled endlessly over it, but they could not come up with a unified opinion. After all, the factions in the city were complicated. There was no one who could make the final decision. Even the mayor had to discuss it with others. But to everyone's surprise, The two dragons were still sleeping soundly in the barn until a strong pigeon flew in and landed on Avina's head. It then lowered its head and pecked at her. Ouch! 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 Avina let out a series of cute cries as she was woken up by the pain. Ugh! Is this a letter from the elders? Avina sat on the soft straw like a duck, revealing her calves and feet wrapped in white stockings. She rubbed her eyes with both hands and read the elder's reply in a daze. This kind of special letter written with magic was similar to a chat log or a memory record. So, Avina could see the letter that is sent back to the tribe. The elder's reply was only 3 sentences. The first one was, "Let nature take its course. Continue searching. The path is just ahead. Do not stop. The path will continue." The second one was, "I think I've heard someone mention this Mia cult before. Maybe the elder knows. But he's still sleeping. I'll ask him when he wakes up." The third one was, "Please bring back a portion of delicious pretend meat." It was very concise. "Is that so?" Avina thought for a moment and replied, "Got it. Understood. I'll go and find some meat for you." Avina tied the magically written letter to the strong pigeon and released it. She then looked down at her brother who was still sleeping. She thought about it carefully and decided not to wake him up first. Instead, she went to look for the delicious meat. We're all mature dragon whelps, we need to learn how to act alone. Furthermore, that priest was very dangerous. She might be caught by him again when she went to look for fake meat. As his sister, she could not let her brother be in danger. If that scary priest wants to ride me, then let him ride me. Big sister needs to protect little brother. Moreover, there was only a small pot of meat, and it wasn't even enough for me to eat. Just like that, Avina came up with a few excuses for herself. Finally, she left her brother behind and sneaked towards Mia's church. On Reynolds's side, he was watering the newly planted catmint in the garden. There were 5 kittens squatting by his feet, staring at the green leaves of the catmint. The catmint was dug out from outside the city by the old bishop with a shovel. It was growing healthily and smelled fragrant. The kittens were craving it so much that they almost cried. It was a pity that the old bishop forbade them from eating it, as it was an important ingredient in making that delicious masquerade meat. Whether or not they could lure the 2 dragons back to the church and let the people of the city celebrate the festival in peace depended on it. In the end, the kittens were so pitiful that they discussed with the old bishop. As long as they worked hard every day, they would be rewarded with a few pieces of catmint. The old bishop agreed. Therefore, the kittens were especially serious in their training these days. Under Reynolds's guidance, they had already learned fighting skills such as the cross-back lock and the Tracy Jiu-Jitsu. It was just that Reynolds himself didn't know much about hand-to-hand combat. He was a gentle and refined priest, so he could only hope that his actions would have the effect of throwing a brick to attract jade, so that the little kittens could comprehend the high-end combat skills such as thunder breath, fierce tiger descends the mountain, tiger crane double form, and so on. This way, when they met a strong enemy in the future, they would be able to help. While he was watering the catmint and instructing Amelia to build the branches and leaves, Avina had already sneaked into Mia's church. Hee, that priest doesn't seem to be here. Avina sniffed her cute little nose. She did not smell any danger or enemies. The place where humans store food should be the kitchen, right? She whispered softly and carefully crept into the kitchen. But at that moment, a pair of strong hands grabbed her twin ponytails from behind. "Hello, welcome to Mia's church. The old bishop didn't lie to me. You guys will come back," Reynolds said happily. He then looked around again, but he didn't find the handsome silver-haired guy. So he continued to ask, "What's the matter? Where's your brother? Are you hiding somewhere, waiting to take a bite out of me?" Although Avina was very scared, she still shook her little head hard, trying to escape from Reynolds's clutches. In the end, she pulled her hair until it hurt. Ouch! Ouch, ouch! Stop struggling. It's useless. You're just a young dragon. You're still no match for me, Renaud said proudly. but he had underestimated Avina's strength. He heard her mumbling in her throat. Her golden twin ponytails suddenly became slippery and impossible to hold, allowing her to successfully escape from Reynolds's control. Reynolds immediately revealed a surprised expression. This time, it was Avina's turn to be proud. "Humph! You didn't expect this, did you? This is the magic that I created myself, the magic that I'm proud of. As long as it's smooth enough, no one can catch me. I'll show you the true strength of the dragon race. I'll defeat you. I'll take back my delicious meat and my sharky." As Avina said that, she planned to use her best killing move. It was inherited from her ancestors, engraved in her DNA and blood. Every dragon was born with an invincible secret. Dragon. Carriage. Charge. Crash. Roar. Avina let out a fierce roar, revealing 2 small canine teeth. She took a step forward with her short legs and charged towards Reynolds. However, Reynolds didn't react in time and was hit in the stomach by her. Bang! There was a muffled sound in the air, followed by a delicate cry. Ouch! 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 Avina immediately covered her head and rolled on the ground in pain. She felt like she had hit a block of iron, and tears came out of her eyes. Reynolds lowered his head and looked at the triangular shield that automatically appeared in front of him, which was his first layer of defense. He really did not know what to say. Chapter 558. In short, just like that, Avina was captured by Reynolds for the second time. This was probably the easiest dragon hunt he had ever had. He did not even have time to use his strength before the other side fell down on her own, but this time, Reynolds did not tie her up with the chains. He felt that this young dragon was really a little weak. She might not even be able to defeat Amia. Other than the little kitten, she could not threaten anyone in the entire church. Such a weak dragon, there was no point in riding, and it would be difficult for her to help him in all kinds of ways like Amia. A dragon, not even as good as my little donkey, how embarrassing, and looking at the way she rolled around on the ground, she was quite cute. He could not bring himself to do it. "So you came here this time to eat meat?" Reynolds asked, and returned the hammerhead shark plushie that he had left in the church to her. Avina had already quieted down. She sat on the bench, curled up, and hugged her legs with her hands. When she saw Reynolds handing over the plushie, she quickly reached out and grabbed it, hugging it tightly in her arms. Rubbing against the soft fur of the plushie, she felt a little more at ease. Only then did she say softly, Can I have another taste? Just a small bite. I can exchange it with you." As she said that, she took out a crystal from her arms and handed it over with trembling hands. Reynolds took it and looked at it. He felt that it was quite beautiful, so he asked curiously, "What's the use of this?" "This is food. We dragons mainly eat this, but occasionally we will eat something else," Avina replied. Hearing that, Reynolds put the crystal into his mouth and tried to bite it. The ball did not move, and there was no taste at all. He could not help but cast a sympathetic and caring look at Avina. They could only eat this, and it was even worse than potatoes. It seemed that the life of the dragons was also very poor. Then, he said sympathetically, "All right, I'll let you have a few more bites, but the mixed meat was made by the old bishop. He went to the market, so we have to wait for him to come back. Since you're already here, let me show you around the church." Avina was actually not very interested in this kind of small and narrow human building, but as a prisoner, she did not dare to resist. She could only pick up the hammerhead shark plushie and follow behind Reynolds. First was the statue of the goddess. "This is the great and kind Lady Mia," Renaud introduced. Avina raised her head and looked at the blurry statue of the goddess. At first, she didn't feel anything, but after looking at it for a while, a strange feeling suddenly emerged in her heart. Perhaps it was due to the keen senses of the dragon race. She felt that the statue, which did not even have any facial features, was also looking at her. Moreover, it was the kind of gaze that directly examined her soul, as if he had seen through her entire body. Along with the gaze, she could even feel a faint pressure. Although it was as weak as a breeze, it made her feel a deep sense of reverence, making her involuntarily want to bow down in worship. Fortunately, this pressure was rather gentle and not that aggressive. It even made Avina feel a sense of familiarity. There was no doubt that the goddess Mia was a true god. But why would a true god look at the mortal realm? Didn't the elders in the clan say that they were not in the mood for leisure now? But more importantly, she was not so hostile to the dragon race. She was a kind and righteous god, but why would she teach such a cruel priest? Just as she was thinking about it, she heard a series of coughs. Reynolds stood beside the offering box, coughing nonstop as if he had suddenly fallen ill. Unfortunately, Avina did not understand his hint at all. Instead, she was secretly delighted. "Humph, are you sick? This is what you get for bullying me." Reynolds saw that she did not say anything, but there was nothing he could do. He could not just say it out loud, could he? He could only complain in his heart, "Young dragons are so immature. I can't argue with a child then." He brought Avina to visit the confession room. "If you have any troubles, you can go in and talk to me." Avina looked at the shackles on the door, and the bars on the iron window, and shook her head. This was basically a cage, wasn't it? Then, Reynolds brought her around the garden and saw the little kitten running around the garden, and Amia squatting next to it, weaving grass. Avina could not help but widen her eyes slightly. What was going on? Why were these cats and donkeys so smart? Were they also protected by the goddess Mia? Was this goddess so kind that she would even protect small animals? Then, will they also protect our dragon race? Avina thought of this, and suddenly a dangerous idea popped up in her mind. But she quickly realized it and shook her head, throwing this strange idea to the back of her mind. She almost thought that this was the future she was looking for, but the dragon race had never believed in any gods, they only believed in their ancestors. And the gods would not respond to their beliefs. They even maintained a considerable amount of hostility towards the dragon race. She vaguely heard the elders mention the reason. It seemed to be because of hypostasis or something, but she was not too sure about the details. Hypostasis was a very mysterious thing. She was only a 200-year-old young dragon. How could she know about it? When the two of them finished walking around the garden, the old bishop happened to come back, but he still could not see Avina's existence. He asked, "Are they still not here today?" Reynolds quickly reached out and poked Avina's soft cheeks and said, "Can't you think of a way to let the old bishop see you?" Avina did not avoid his poke and asked curiously, "He's a bishop and you're a priest." "He's a bishop and you're a priest. According to human logic, he should be stronger than you, right? Why can you see me and he can't? You little female dragon, you're really stupid. The old bishop is old and his eyesight is not good. Do you still need to ask such a simple question?" Reynolds answered confidently. Avina was speechless for a moment. She did not know how to refute, so she could only mumble something. Now the old bishop could see her existence. He immediately showed a kind smile and said, "Ha ha. Good, 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 good. You're a cute little girl. Do you want to eat meat? Wait, Grandpa will make it for you." After that, he picked a few pieces of catmint from the garden and went to the kitchen. Avina suddenly felt a familiar sense of happiness, just like when she was doted on by the kind elders in the dragon race. If there's nothing else, I might as well stay here. Although this priest is dangerous, the bishop is a kind elder. He should stop and correct him, right? Then I'll have mixed meat to eat every day. As she thought about it, she almost drooled. Chapter 559. The old bishop placed the food on the table one by one. Then, he divided the goat's milk that the kitten had been drinking into a few small bowls and wrapped a small scarf around each of them. Finally, he brought out the delicious mixed meat that Avina had been waiting for. Avina was about to pounce on it, but Reynolds grabbed her twin ponytails. "Don't move," Reynolds said fiercely. Then, like the old bishop, he took out a handkerchief and pinned it to Avina's collar. Just like that, the old bishop and Reynolds sat at the table to eat. The kitten drank milk under the table, while Avina knelt at the side and ate the meat in big mouthfuls. In the end, Reynolds only had time to drink 2 mouthfuls of soup before the big bowl of mixed meat disappeared at the speed of light. It seemed that Avina did not leave anything for her brother and the elders of the clan. After she finished talking about the meat, she wiped her mouth with the handkerchief in front of her chest and looked at Reynolds and the old bishop eagerly, indicating that she was still not full. "She seems to be planning to stay here? But can we afford to feed her? I feel like she has a big appetite." Reynolds muttered softly. The old bishop replied, "It's fine. They don't really rely on this food to survive. They mainly rely on that crystal, the one I gave you before. Eating this meat is just for the taste." As expected, Avina pouted in disappointment when she saw that the old bishop didn't say anything. She unhappily took out a piece of crystal from her bosom and threw it into her mouth, chewing loudly before swallowing it in one gulp. Only then was she satisfied. She found a bench nearby, curled up and lay down. Just like that, she began to sleep, not at all worried that the 2 humans would plot against her. "Isn't this girl a little too nervous? Isn't she afraid of being cooked?" Reynolds could not help but complain. He then looked at the pair of delicate, smooth white stockings on her legs. "This is probably the dragon race, right? They have no natural enemies at all in the natural world. They don't have the vigilance to survive at all. That's why they are like this." The old bishop shook his head helplessly. "Can we use this girl to help preach?" Reynolds asked. "That's difficult." The old bishop shook his head. "Although dragons look very majestic, they are not very popular creatures. Most people are still afraid of them. There are also many people like you who are very interested in her flesh and blood. Therefore, if outsiders were to find out that we have a dragon here, it would attract a lot of trouble. Furthermore, this kind of eye-catching matter is not in line with the teachings. Then why are we keeping her? Since he couldn't ride it, couldn't play with it, and couldn't kill it for meat, what was the point of raising it? Smelting copper?" Reynolds asked grumpily. Although his current salary at the weapon shop was generous, a lot of it had to be spent on the daily expenses of the church. Every penny was hard to come by, so of course he couldn't waste it like this. The old bishop smiled and replied, "My plan is to let Avina and her brother return to their original forms, then fly away from the sinless city under everyone's watchful eyes. After flying far away, they will return to their human forms and secretly return. This way, at least everyone can peacefully celebrate the harvest festival and enjoy the festivities. As for the future, you can consider training her like how you train a kitten, or you can bring her into your sect. She can become a nun or something, so you'll have a helper in the future. The number of our believers has been increasing, and you're becoming more and more famous. You'll definitely be busy in the future, so we'll need another helper." As the old bishop spoke, he carefully glanced in the direction of the goddess statue, but he didn't notice anything strange, so he secretly sighed in relief. It seemed that the goddess didn't object to this arrangement. If the goddess objected, he would have noticed it, just like when he first adopted Reynolds. The original plan was to raise him into a normal priest, but the goddess objected to it. He didn't know what the goddess' intentions were, but believers couldn't fathom the will of God. After the meal, Reynolds wanted to poke Avina's face to wake her up to preach, but he suddenly had a guest. It was Sir Donald's butler. "Master has taken on a strange business and needs some advice from you. I wonder if you have time?" Reynolds nodded. "Although I'm very busy every day, I'm duty-bound to help Sir Donald." He had a good impression of Sir Donald, and if it weren't for him, he would still be living in the old church on Old Oak Street, munching on potatoes, so he remembered this favor. Therefore, the two of them went to Sir Donald's jewelry shop, Starlight. Sir Donald was indeed a jewelry aristocratic family. His jewelry shop was located on the busiest commercial street in the Sinless City, Prosperity Avenue, and occupied a small 3-story building. The whole shop was decorated with gold and jade, and at first glance, one could tell that it was high-end and classy. "When I'm rich, I'll buy a beautiful piece of jewelry here and sacrifice it to Lady Mia," Reynolds thought to himself. The butler took him straight to a reception room on the 3rd floor. As soon as he entered, he saw Sir Donald, who looked unhappy, and a sheriff with a frown on his face. When he saw Reynolds, the constable with a captain's epaulet finally showed a smile on his face and greeted him with more enthusiasm than Sir Donald. "You must be Reverend Reynolds? It's great that you're willing to help." Reynolds looked at his unfamiliar face and asked doubtfully, "What's the matter? May I know who you are?" "Oh, my name is Hank. I'm from the 3rd Department, which is to catch thieves." The constable briefly introduced himself and then explained the situation to Reynolds together with Sir Donald. It turned out that the shop was robbed, however, only a piece of crystal was lost, and the other valuable jewelry was safe and sound. The loss was not great. However, the crystal was different from the rest. It was very beautiful and crystal clear, and it was emitting a comfortable energy. A noble lady took a fancy to the crystal on the spot and wanted to make it into a pair of earrings. She offered a high price and even paid a deposit. However, the crystal was stolen that night. The crystal was sold to the shop by a merchant who set up a street stall. No one knew where he got it from, and the thief was nowhere to be found, so there was no way to find another piece. After all, this matter was related to the shop's reputation and reputation. Sir Donald had no choice but to ask the constable to help with the investigation. However, the thief was very cunning and cautious, and did not leave any clues or traces, leaving Captain Hank helpless. In desperation, he suddenly remembered that the beautiful First Lieutenant Undine of the 9th Department had a lover who was a reverend named Reynolds. He heard that this man was very good at investigation and had helped the 9th Department with many big cases. Thus, Reynolds was invited over. Chapter 560. After explaining the situation, Captain Hank was afraid that Reynolds would not give him face, so he flattered him again and again. "Pastor Reynolds, you might not know this, but you're a famous person in our security team. Everyone knows about you. You're observant, have sharp intuition, and have an active mind. Those guys from Geo could talk about you every day, not to mention Lieutenant Undine. Our family and Undine's family are also old friends. Our relationship is very good. She is also my niece." Previously, everyone was guessing who could conquer this flower of the security team. Now there is naturally no suspense. Compared with his flattery, Sir Donald was much simpler and more direct. "Pastor Reynolds, this matter is related to the reputation of our shop. I hope you can help. I will thank you later." Reynolds nodded his head repeatedly and answered seriously, "Yes. I understand. I will do my best for this matter." Then, the three of them went together to the underground warehouse where the crystal was stored, just next to the processing room. Like some unprocessed raw stones, they were naturally not as tightly guarded as the finished products. They were stored in the warehouse and not sent to the city's vault. This was also convenient for the craftsmen to work on it. Moreover, the public security in the Sinless City has always been very good. This prosperous avenue was even more so. There were sheriffs patrolling day and night, and Sir Donald also specially hired professional security personnel. In theory it was safe enough, but the crystal was still missing. He didn't even know when it was gone. Reynolds first used the lie detection magic to interrogate the security guards on duty last night. In the end, he found that it was not a case of theft. They did not slack off last night and had been guarding their post. Then he checked the scene again. He did not find any obvious traces visible to the naked eye. Even the safe where the crystal was placed was intact. The safe did not look ordinary. It was very sturdy, and there were many patterns engraved on the surface and inside. So, the thief should have used magic, right? Mages like to steal other people's things. Reynolds came to a preliminary conclusion. Although Captain Hank and Sir Donald on the side did not know why he was biased against mages, they still explained, "This safe itself is a magical item. There are many protective measures on it, specifically to prevent magical theft. I spent a lot of money on it." Sir Donald introduced the origin of the safe, and then a pained expression appeared on his face. It seemed that the money spent was really a little too much. Captain Hank followed and said, that's right. This is a magic safe made by Master Venner himself. If someone uses magic to steal it, Master Venner will immediately discover it, and the Master is the most powerful and knowledgeable sorcerer in this city. It's impossible for anyone to steal the crystal from him. That's why this matter is so troublesome. But when Reynolds heard this, he actually revealed a happy expression and hurriedly said, I see. Then I know who the culprit is. There is only one truth. That Wen Na stole the crystal. Since Wen Na is so powerful, and this box was made by him, he must have a way to take the crystal away without anyone noticing, right? The captain and the knight couldn't help but stare blankly. At the same time, they revealed an embarrassed expression. After the air was quiet for a while, Captain Hank reluctantly explained, although logically speaking, Master Wen Na is indeed suspicious. He is a highly respected master and has an astonishing amount of wealth. Moreover, he is backed by the towering tree known as the School of Supplicants. Even the city lord is respectful to him. Even if such a big shot is really interested in the crystal, he wouldn't resort to such a despicable means like stealing, right? He has no motive at all. As he spoke, he cursed in his heart. Is this young priest really reliable? He even dares to suspect Master Venner? He doesn't look as brave as Jiu Ku and the others said at all. Could it be that Undine, that girl, forced herself to brag in order to flatter him? Sir Donald on the side also said, I also don't think this matter will have anything to do with Master Venner. He, his disciples, and his wives are regulars in the shop. We have always had a good relationship with him, and get along well. Reynolds sighed helplessly when he heard what they said. Sigh, it's because of your inertia that he dares to be so bold. Actually, this matter is very simple. Can't we just go to his house and search it? Wouldn't the truth be out if we catch him with the stolen goods? The captain and the knight were speechless for a while. How would they dare to search the house of such a big shot? Even if there was clear evidence, they wouldn't dare, let alone it was just a groundless speculation. And when Reynolds saw their expressions, he knew that they didn't believe him at all. The wisdom of mortals, however, he had a second plan. He took out the crystal that Avenaro had given him and asked, What's the matter? The lost crystal, is it like this? Sir Donald couldn't help but widen his eyes. He took the crystal from Reynolds's hand and looked at it carefully, then said repeatedly, Yes, it's like this. The color, luster, transparency, and that comfortable feeling are almost the same. Except for the different shape and size, this one is bigger. Pastor Reynolds, can you give this crystal to me? Reynolds saw his anxious look, scratched his head, showed a distressed look, and said in a deep voice, Although you have asked, and I naturally agree, this crystal was given to me by a lovely believer. Sir Donald immediately used the simplest and most crude method of persuasion. 100 gold. This is not a matter of money. After all, it's a gift from someone. 150 gold. Don't be like this, I didn't mean that. 200. Since you are so sincere, then I can only reluctantly give it to you. Seeing Reynolds nod, Sir Donald breathed a sigh of relief. He immediately asked the butler on the side to bring a bulging bag of money, and handed it to Reynolds. As for the crystal, it was also hurriedly sent to the craftsmen and asked them to work overnight. Although the process was not the same, the problem could be solved with money, which was the best result. Anyway, he could sell it to the lady for 500 gold later, so he wouldn't lose anything. It seems that it was the right choice to ask you to come here today, Sir Donald said with satisfaction, and cleverly did not ask about the specific origin of the crystal. He only said that if there were more in the future, he hoped to sell it to him at the same price. Chapter 561. The matter was resolved in a special way. Both sides got what they wanted. Reynolds returned to Mia's church with the bulging money pouch in his hand. As soon as he entered, he saw Avenaro curled up and sleeping soundly on the bench. She didn't seem to be on guard at all. And the money pouch in his arms was showing a heavy weight. How about Reynolds almost had evil thoughts. Fortunately, he still abided by the teachings of the church. He quickly shook his head and threw the evil thoughts to the back of his mind. He walked to Avina's side and poked her face, trying to wake her up. However, Avina was sleeping soundly and did not respond. Reynolds had no choice but to pull her blonde ponytails. It did not work. She's sleeping too soundly, isn't she? He's simply at the mercy of others, doing whatever he wants. Reynolds had no choice but to change his method. Avenaro, who was in a deep sleep, suddenly felt the world spinning. She quickly opened her eyes and found that her body was spinning rapidly in the air like a pendulum. Reynolds was holding her slim waist with both hands and swinging her petite body around like a stick. Help! Help! Avina quickly let out a pitiful whimper. Reynolds saw that she was awake and stopped as well. He placed her back on the bench and continued, "Don't worry. You're awake?" Avina, at Avenaro was dizzy and tried her best to resist. In order to not let Reynolds get close to her, she leaned back and instinctively raised her little foot in white stockings to kick Reynolds away. In the end, Reynolds grabbed her feet and stopped her meaningless resistance. He said sternly, "Don't worry. Stop fooling around. Be serious. I have something to discuss with you." What do you want?" Avina asked timidly. She curled up in fear and hugged the hammerhead shark doll tightly. It seemed like she was afraid that Reynolds would suddenly go berserk and jump on her. "Do you still have the crystal you gave me before? I'll trade it with you," Reynolds said seriously. Although Avina was very stupid and weak, he could totally cheat and rob her and eat her up, but that was not in line with Reynolds's style. He would never do such evil deeds. Therefore, he decided to make a fair deal with Avenaro in private. It could be money, or teaching of divine arts, or services. As long as he could get the crystal from Avenaro and sell it to Sir Donald, it would not be a far-fetched fantasy to buy a prettier and grander church for the goddess. Unfortunately, Avina shook her head. "No, no more. We only need to eat one piece a month. We won't bring much with us. Every month, when we need to eat, the elders in the clan will send it over. Since it's rations, why make it so troublesome?" Reynolds asked in confusion. "The elders are afraid that I won't be able to control my mouth and eat too much in one go, turning into a fat dinosaur in the future," Avina said softly, a little embarrassed. Seeing that his source of income was cut off just like that, Reynolds was very reluctant. He thought of the stolen crystal again, so he talked about the strange case and asked in the end, "Do you have a way to get the crystal back?" Avina shook her head again. "It's just food for us. It's not something important, but, from what you described, it doesn't sound like it was stolen." Reynolds couldn't help but be stunned. If it wasn't stolen, could it have been eaten by the safe? There is indeed such a possibility. Previously, there was a bizarre theft in our clan. A cave full of crystals disappeared without a trace. At first, everyone thought that the crystals were eaten by someone secretly, but the elders studied them for a long time and found that although the crystals tasted good, they could easily resonate with magic and then evaporate into thin air. That time, it was because the cave of the crystal was very close to a magic node of the guardian barrier. When the barrier was activated, it caused the crystals to resonate and evaporate. Reynolds listened silently. Because he knew nothing about magic, he couldn't judge the truth of this matter. He just felt sorry for the dragons. That was a warehouse full of crystals. But then, it really wasn't that Master Venner who did it? Tsk, what a pity. The old bishop was also attracted by the conversation between the two and interrupted. But according to what you said, at least the magic fluctuation of the guardian barrier can cause the crystals to resonate, right? Avenaro nodded and replied, yes. Yes, if it's just a slight magic fluctuation, it's fine. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to carry it around. The old bishop followed up. But Reynolds said that this crystal was just stored in a magic safe. No matter how carefully made the safe is, its fluctuation can't be compared to a guardian barrier, right? And in order not to affect daily use, these items have to be deliberately eliminated. Reynolds listened, thought for a moment, and asked in return. So, you mean that Sir Viscount's shop didn't choose a good location? It just happened to be near a magic node of the barrier? That's not right. Why don't I remember there being no guardian barrier in the city? Although there were many factions in the Sinless City, the religious forces were still the main force. So, something as important as the guardian barrier was naturally controlled by the three major churches. They had set up many divine barriers in the city, forming a large-scale defense system called the Wall of Sighs. Although it was not usually used, when a crisis came, its strength was enough to withstand the attacks of an angel. Its durability was also enough to last until reinforcements came, ensuring that the city would not be lost. So, even if there were no legendary powerhouses in the Sinless City, it was enough to rest easy. However, the cost of activating it once was not cheap, and it would definitely be a waste of money. If not, the mayor would have ordered the activation of the barrier to drag out Avina and Ince. In order not to interfere with the operation of the divine barrier, the guardian barrier was not allowed to be set up in the city. That was why Venner's Mage Tower was set up outside the city. But from what the old bishop said, there was actually someone secretly setting up a guardian barrier in the city? What was their motive? This kind of thing can be big or small. Although the Wall of Sighs has not been activated for more than a decade, no one knows when it will suddenly be used. It's a pity that you and I don't know magic, so we can't investigate, the old bishop said with a serious expression. I understand now. Someone is trying to cause trouble. Reynolds nodded his head vigorously. I'll write an anonymous letter and report it to the major churches. Reynolds immediately got a pen and paper and began to write an anonymous letter. Chapter 562. However, the old bishop thought for a while and turned to Avina and asked, You know magic, right? Can you help us investigate? Avenaro seized the opportunity and said proudly, That's right. We dragons are natural-born magicians. We are born with magical talent. No matter how hard you humans work, you can never reach our level. When Reynolds heard this, he asked from the side, So, you're very brave. Let's see if you can cast a spell? How about a Chibaku Tensei? Avina was stunned. What is this? Is this a new magic invented by humans? It sounds very ferocious. You don't know? Then let's change it to a simpler one, an apologetic pyroblast? Reynolds continued. Avina was stunned. She knew about pyroblast, but what was pyroblast? A new type of pyroblast? But why was he apologetic? What kind of inexplicable magic did humans invent? You still don't know? How disappointing. Then I'll change it to a simpler one, an annihilation of thorns, heaven. This is a dragon's own ability. Avina was about to cry. She knew all the dragons in the world, but she had never heard of a dragon that knew this trick, and the name sounded very strange. Was there really such a dragon magic in the world? In the end, the old bishop could not stand it anymore. He snatched the pen and paper from Reynolds and said, Avina is still young, don't bully her. I'll write the anonymous letter. You and her go to Prosperity Avenue to have a look." With that said, he turned his head to reveal a benevolent smile at Avenaro and continued, "You're right. Be careful. I'll cook and wait for you to come back." Avina immediately recalled the delicious taste of mixed meat and nodded repeatedly. But why did he have to remind her to be careful? With this terrifying priest around, no one could threaten her, right? Renaud said and called Amia over. Together with Avina, they got on the donkey cart and rushed towards Prosperity Avenue. After the two of them left, the old bishop was not in a hurry to write a letter. Instead, he spread out his divination stance and tried to divine the mastermind behind all this. He directly started with Wana, who made the safe, to divine whether he was the one who made it. But before he could scatter the petals in his hand, his heart inexplicably throbbed, and he felt a strong sense of danger. He immediately froze, not daring to move. After a while, the palpitating feeling slowly disappeared. The old bishop hurriedly looked up at the statue of the goddess in the middle and softly muttered to himself, "You can't divine? Will it be very dangerous?" But Venner isn't even a legend. He's just a master. It's impossible for the goddess to issue such a warning. Did Wena seek refuge with someone? Or, "You don't want me to get involved in this matter?" Having said that, the elderly bishop did not dare to think any further. He hurriedly lowered his head and continued writing the anonymous letter. "This is as far as I can help you this time." On the other hand, Reynolds had already walked far away. He turned his head and looked at Avina, who was kneeling beside him, her small hands clinging to the railing with a curious look on her face. "Is it fun to ride a car?" Renaud asked. "This is the first time I've taken your vehicle." "It's quite refreshing," Avina replied. "Actually, let me tell you something. Pulling a car is more fun. Do you want to try it?" Reynolds pointed at Amia in front of him and said. Avenala looked down at her small arms and legs and said regretfully, "I'm sorry. But I can't pull it?" "Tsk. She didn't fall for it," Reynolds cursed in his heart. The two of them soon arrived at Prosperity Avenue, but they did not go to Sir's jewelry store. Instead, they parked the car in a hidden alley. Reynolds had just come out of the store. It was not good to go back for this kind of thing, so he planned to go in quietly. So he said to Avina, "Don't you know how to make yourself physically invisible? Give me one too." However, Avenaro took advantage of the situation and raised her conditions. "No way. Only if you promise not to bully me in the future." Reynolds did not reply. He narrowed his eyes slightly and showed a kind smile. He clenched his fists and cracked his knuckles. "Ugh. I'm sorry, I went too far." Avina was so scared that her twin ponytails almost stood up straight. She quickly cast an invisibility spell on Reynolds. However, the spell did not work, huh? That's strange. Avenalo tilted her head and scratched her head. Then, she cast a spell similar to Insight on herself, trying to see Reynolds' condition. She used dragon magic, which was not the same as human magic, so she could see different things. She did not see a shield or a castle. She only saw a towering mountain that seemed to go straight to the sky. She tried to look up, but she could not see the peak of the mountain. Even if she changed back to her original form, she was as small as a mosquito in front of the mountain. The biggest difference between a dragon's detection spell and a human's was that it could not directly see the other party's condition and energy fluctuation. However, it could vaguely see the other party's level. Avina suddenly felt a stinging pain in her eyes. She almost cried. She quickly looked away, not daring to look at Reynolds directly. At that moment, she suddenly understood why this guy could see her and her brother. The dragon's invisibility spell was useless in front of a higher-level being, just like how Avina could not hide herself in front of the elders and the goddess Mia. But this priest in front of her, if he did not use any special means, he was just the most ordinary human. She could not sense the energy fluctuation on him at all. He did not have the aura of a powerful being at all. It should be the same reason why her magic was ineffective. What kind of monster is this? Ugh! I beg you, please don't eat me. Avina was scared out of her wits. She even changed to using honorifics. What's wrong with you? Reynolds asked in confusion. He reached out and patted her head. No. Nothing, I'm not good enough. My magic is ineffective. Avina replied incoherently. Reynolds did not understand what she was saying. Could it be that she had cast the spell wrongly and made herself dumber? He had no choice. Magic was unreliable. Reynolds could only wait in the alley and let Avina go to the shop to look for traces. Please don't worry, I will definitely do as you say. Avina answered obediently. Reynolds did not understand. How did this rebellious little female dragon become so obedient all of a sudden? I didn't do anything to increase their favorability or loyalty. Chapter 563. Could it be she finally realized that he was a humble, cautious, low-key, reserved, and elegant person? She had been influenced by his charisma. Reynolds's imagination ran wild for a moment, but he did not think too much about it. He immediately asked Lilianlo to sneak into the shop to check it out. Not long after, Lilianlo returned and reported, "There is indeed a magic node there. There is indeed a magic node there. The crystal should have been affected by it and evaporated. I can still smell a trace of the crystal's scent. There is indeed magic power flowing in the surroundings, although these have been specially concealed, making it difficult for you humans to detect. It can't escape the sharp sense of smell of a dragon. Although I can't directly sense the complete magic network, I can still smell the flow of magic." She continued to explain the structure of a magic barrier to Reynolds. It was roughly like a map of a country. The nodes were the cities, and the network was the roads that connected them. When all these were put together, they formed a complete barrier. The barrier itself could also be seen as a large-scale magic circle, a ritual, or a spell. If the entire layout could be drawn, the specific effects of the barrier could be determined. Reynolds nodded at Lilianlo's hard work. He took out a small dried fish and fed it to Lilianlo. The dried fish was pickled by the old bishop. It was specially given to Reynolds to train the kittens to reward their excellent performance. Hence, Lilianlo was also rewarded. Lilianlo chewed subconsciously. Although it was not as delicious as mixed meat, the taste was not bad. She even wanted to eat another one. After that, Reynolds first went to the roadside kiosk to buy a map. He then took the donkey cart and let Lilianlo rely on her sense of smell to follow the direction of the flow of magic. He also outlined the flow of magic on the map. Surprisingly, the coverage of the barrier was surprisingly large. The two of them walked all the way from afternoon to night. They basically circled around Sinless City, but still could not see the whole picture. They could only sketch a rough outline on the map. But the two of them still made a major discovery. Every node that the two of them found was not the kind of formation that could be recognized at a glance. Instead, it was like the safe in the jewelry store. The formation that maintained the operation of the node was hidden in some ordinary formation, and it had been treated to be more secretive. Simply put, those magical items that were similar to jewelry store safes were very hidden magic nodes. Most of these hidden nodes were carved on chandeliers, sculptures, and other objects that were not easy to move, so their stability and integrity were guaranteed. At the same time, these magical items were not cheap. Most of them were stored in the homes of the rich, so that they would not be tampered with, and would not attract the attention and suspicion of outsiders. This could be said to be an extremely secretive and cunning method. If Lilian Lowe did not have the ability to enter and exit other mansions at will, she would not have discovered this hidden scheme at all. Can you see the effect of this barrier? Relying on the light from his eyes, Reynolds drew on the map while asking without lifting his head. But Lilianlo did not answer. "Hello? Where are you? Have you fallen asleep?" Turning his head, he saw that her big emerald eyes were drooping. She leaned lazily beside Reynolds and had entered a half-awake state. After all, it was already late at night. Reynolds could only poke Lilianlo. "Ugh, no. Don't ride me," Lilianlo said drowsily. "Then I'll ride your brother?" Reynolds pretended to threaten her. When Lilianlo heard that her brother was about to be killed, she quickly woke up. She rubbed her eyes hard and tried to defend herself. "Ugh, no. I'm not asleep," Reynolds repeated his question again. "No. With our current progress, we can barely determine that this barrier has the function of shielding and concealing. Unless we draw a complete magic network, we won't be able to see anything," Lilianlo said helplessly. "What if we directly destroy these nodes?" Reynolds touched the sea urchin necklace on his body, looking eager to try. "That won't do. This kind of large-scale barrier is very complicated and dangerous. If we act rashly, it's likely to cause a big explosion," Lilianlo hurriedly advised. She even used her small hands to hold his arm and looked at him anxiously, afraid that he would do something rash. "Let's think of a way to draw a complete network as soon as possible. Although I'm very sleepy, if you feed me a small piece of dried fish, I'll still be able to perk up." Fortunately, Reynolds was not a brute. After feeding Lilianlo another piece of dried fish, he continued. "Looks like there's only one way. I'll go and kill that Venner now." His tone was so casual that it took Lilianlo a moment to realize what he was talking about. She had seen Venner before and heard about him from passers-by. She still had some impression of him. She knew that this person was equivalent to a human elder, the kind that was highly respected and had decent strength. Then, this ordinary-looking priest in front of her decided to kill him? Reynolds noticed her puzzled expression and reluctantly explained, "I'm sorry, but I'm sorry. What's so hard to understand? As long as the culprit is gone, this barrier won't be a threat anymore, right?" Unfortunately, Lilianlo still could not understand his train of thought. "We can't be sure that it was Venner who set up this barrier. Those objects used to act as barriers might not have been made by him, right? It's also possible that he resold them or something. Even if it had something to do with him, this barrier might not have been set up for destruction, right? This person is considered a big shot in your human society. Why would he do such a thing?" Reynolds sighed helplessly. He revealed a disappointed expression and asked in return, "What's the matter?" He asked, "Do you know the biggest difference between a smart person and a fool? Only fools are always looking for evidence and asking a lot of questions. A smart person will just go straight to the door. If they can't solve the problem, they'll get rid of the person who caused the problem." Reynolds rode the donkey cart back to the church. He had to first settle Lilianlo, who could not stand it any more before it was convenient for him to act. By the time he arrived at the church, it was already early in the morning of the next day. Lilian was already lying on his lap, fast asleep. Reynolds carried her over his shoulder and carried her all the way back to the small building where they lived. He randomly found an empty room and threw her into it. He then went back to his room to change his clothes. Chapter 564. But the old bishop was still awake. "Who are you going to kill this time?" "Oh no, who are you going to persuade?" Reynolds explained what he and Lilianlo had discovered as he changed his clothes. He even handed over the map that outlined the general shape of the barrier. The old bishop looked at the map carefully, but he could not understand it at all. Out of habit, he assumed a divination posture and tried to divine the barrier. This time, he was not interrupted by the sense of danger from before. However, the final petal that confirmed the result shattered into thin strands in the air. The divination was severely disrupted and did not yield any results. But in fact, this phenomenon was also a result. It showed that the barrier was very dangerous and was the work of a high-level existence. He quickly got up and went back to his room to find a few old books and started reading. In the end, the page stopped at a complicated and gorgeous magic circle diagram. The complicated patterns made one's scalp tingle just by looking at them. Beside the diagram, there were lines of annotations written in the ancient common language. Reynolds did not understand the ancient common language at all. The old bishop had dabbled in it a little, but he was not proficient. He could only refer to the dictionary and barely translate part of the content. The name of this barrier is this word no longer exists in the modern language, but its meaning is the moment of reaping pain and despair. Just the name alone made Reynolds and the old bishop's expression become very serious. The old bishop continued to translate. This is not a simple barrier, but a ritual. A ritual to summon the mother of desire, as. The old bishop's face turned pale as he exclaimed. How is this possible? How can such a ritual be reproduced in this era? Since the end of the ancient divine war, which ended with the expulsion of the evil gods by the righteous gods, such a dangerous ritual, be it the relevant knowledge or the key materials needed, has all been strictly controlled. It should be impossible to set it up again. Reynolds was also shocked by the descent of the evil god and quickly said, This Venner, he wants to summon the evil god? How can he be so evil? And I heard that he's as rich as a country and has many wives. Why would he do something like this to take revenge on society? The old bishop shook his head. Venner is merely an archmagus. He might not know the meaning of this ritual. He is most likely just a pawn. Following the orders of some existence, he secretly set up this ritual that even he himself does not know the effects of. This also explains why he would do such a stupid thing when he's living such a comfortable life. He's probably just following the orders of the sex leader, the demigod sorcerer, supplicant Karl. That's why my divinations kept failing. As for why a demigod would do such a thing, there are too many possibilities. His thoughts are hard to fathom. But what I don't understand is that this is the sinless city that is being watched by the gods. Setting up such a large-scale barrier is no small feat. It would take at least a few years, or even more than a decade. How did Venner complete the setup under the eyes of the gods? At this point, the old bishop paused for a moment, and quickly turned his head to look out of the window. His gaze was incomparably deep. Through the window, he looked at the pitch-black night sky, as if he wanted to spy on those gods high above. At this moment, the old bishop seemed to understand why Goddess Mia had given him 2 divine artifacts in a row, and both of them were weapons. The goddess's previous warning was very likely aimed at this. He also seemed to understand why the dragons would send 2 dragon whelps over at this time. If not for Lilianlo's sharp senses, the sinless city might have welcomed a huge surprise. The old bishop retracted his gaze and looked at Renaud in front of him. Renaud was a little uncomfortable under the old bishop's gaze. Then if I go and kill Venner now, it should be fine, right? The old bishop smiled bitterly and shook his head. He's just the one who set up the barrier, not the one who controls it. Killing him is meaningless. Then what should we do? Wait for Iras to descend and then kill him? Renaud asked again. The old bishop was a little confused by the question. After a while, he said seriously, Iras is an evil god. Iras is a true evil god. Even you can't face him directly. Renaud was a little discouraged. He looked down at his hands and said regretfully, Sigh. If only I were as powerful as Senior Brother. If Senior Marshal Brother is still alive, we can fight together. The old bishop was speechless. He could only change the topic. Let's think of a way to stop his descent. Let's finish reading this notebook first. There might be a solution in it. The annotations at the back first introduced the function of the ritual. This is the highest level of ritual. Once the setup is complete, Iras's power can descend through the ritual and use part of his authority. That's why it's so difficult to discover. Iras is the master of lies and can use his authority to make the ritual have the effect of deceiving and deceiving. Fortunately, the setup of this ritual is extremely complicated. It takes a long time and a lot of rare materials. If you pay a little attention, you'll notice it. It's almost impossible to complete the setup. When the old bishop read this, Renaud could not help but mutter, "But the barrier is already complete. I've made so many cultists repent." The old bishop could hear the self-blame in his voice and quickly comforted him. Everyone thinks that the sinless city is an absolutely safe place because it's under the protection of the gods, and the cultists that you've dealt with are probably just trying to confuse and deceive the public. Renaud sighed and asked, "What's the matter? Does it say what to do when the barrier is complete?" The old bishop quickly translated the rest of the content. "But if you don't notice it in advance and allow the barrier to be completed, you can only pray to the righteous gods for divine punishment. But if you don't get an answer, then I suggest, kill yourself immediately. That way, you won't become a puppet of desire and lies, and degenerate into a terrifying monster." Renaud could not help but sigh at how things had deteriorated. The goddess teachings were right. Think about it. If everyone in the city could be humble and cautious, how could such a scale of ritual enchantment be formed? The days in the sinless city were too peaceful. Actually, if you think about it carefully, this was already starting to happen when you dealt with the cultists and the archaeologist Sandro. Chapter 565. It's the other side's fault for dying too quickly. They didn't even alert me. The old bishop was taken aback for a moment. Perhaps it wasn't the Tree of Moros or Cyrus, the abyssal demon king, who wanted to descend. It was all a pretense. From the beginning to the end, it was Es who had personally appeared. He was the god of lies. Reynolds thought about it carefully and raised a question. Since this barrier has already taken shape and Es can already descend, why hasn't he done so? Is there something in this city that he's afraid of? Or is he waiting for a better opportunity? Does he want to participate in the harvest festival? Whenever it was a matter of life and death, Reynolds's mind would always return to the state he was in when he was helping Undine with her case. "So we still have some time, right?" he asked again. The old bishop was stunned for a moment. He thought about it carefully and quickly said, "Indeed, there is still some chance. I'll go look for Bishop Yek and ask him to activate the Wall of Sighs immediately. At the same time, I'll send someone to capture Venner." Renaud nodded and said, "That's right. Then I'll go and see if I can directly destroy the barrier. This sage's notebook doesn't say that the barrier can't be attacked, right?" The old bishop lowered his head and flipped through it again. "Indeed, it didn't say anything about that, but the barrier has already taken shape. Es can directly descend with his power. If you attack rashly, however," Reynolds was fearless. He held a small wooden hammer in his left hand and a meteor hammer in his right. "How would you know if you don't try? Although I'm insignificant before an evil god, I still have the possibility of passion, courage, friendship, love, and hope. And the protection of the goddess." The old bishop was speechless for a moment. He didn't know how to refute, and so, the two of them began their operation in the night. Reynolds first brought the old bishop to Bishop Yek's residence, which was not far from the Mithrin residence. Then, he drove to a node marked on the map. After Reynolds and Amia left, the old bishop walked out of the hidden alley where he got off the car. He straightened his clothes and walked towards the two crusaders on night duty. The two crusaders immediately became alert and pointed their spears at the strange old man. The old archbishop simply smiled and cast a divine spell. He then said generously, "My lord, I'm here to visit Bishop Yek. I have something important to report." The two crusaders were slightly stunned, and their eyes were filled with confusion. They then made way, and even took the initiative to lead the old bishop to the door of Bishop Yek's bedroom. But before the old bishop could knock on the door, he heard a shout from inside. "Who is it?" Then, the door opened automatically. Bishop Yek, who was wearing pajamas and a long nightcap with a fur ball hanging from the tip of the cap, stood behind the door. In his hands were 2 balls of dancing holy flames. The old bishop sniffed the holy flame. "Not bad, just a little weaker than Renaud's. It's an emergency. Please forgive me for my hasty visit," the old bishop said as he walked into the bedroom. When Bishop Yek saw his face clearly, he asked in a puzzled tone, "What do you think? Lord Yolo, is that you?" "Didn't you already?" However, before he could finish his sentence, he immediately shook his head and corrected himself. "No, that's not right. I got the wrong person. Are you the bishop of Mia's church?" As he spoke, Bishop Yek also relaxed. He dispersed the sacred flame in his hand and asked curiously, "What's the matter? What's so urgent that you're looking for me for? Did Renaud find another woman outside?" "No, Renaud is still sleeping at home. I'm looking for you because it's a matter of life and death for the entire sinless city." The old bishop did not beat around the bush and immediately told Bishop Yek about the impending descent of As. Bishop Yek's face turned pale when he heard the news. At the same time, Renaud also rushed to the location marked on the map. It was a wealthy merchant's mansion, where several mana networks intersected. According to Lilianlo, this should be a key node. As for the object that acted as the node, according to Lilianlo, who snuck into the mansion, it was a sculpture of one of the wealthy merchant's ancestors. Because few people would do such a thing, it left a deep impression on her. "Wait for me here. Don't let anyone else come near." Reynolds gave Amia an order. Amia's dark red eyes lit up. She clenched her fists in front of her chest and rubbed her palms together. Only then did Renaud relax and sneak into the mansion. Since it was a mansion in the wealthy district of the city, and the sinless city had always been a safe place, there were no guards here. Other than the owner of the mansion, a knight named Shandu, there were only a few servants. The mansion was huge and had many rooms. Renaud tried to look around and found that the owner of the mansion was probably a sculpture lover or a sculpture dealer. There were all kinds of sculptures everywhere in the mansion. Who knew which one was his ancestor? Renaud had no choice but to use divine insight to examine the mansion and the sculptures. Even divine insight could not find anything out of the ordinary. Did S use the power of lies to hide them? This evil god is too cunning. If he's an evil god, why does he still hide his head and show his tail? Renaud cursed in annoyance. However, the divine insight spell helped him find the bedroom of the owner of the mansion, so he broke in and woke up Sir Mondo, who was still sleeping soundly. Who are you?" Sir Shandu turned pale with fright. He carefully looked at the appearance of the strange person in front of him and recognized that this was the frightening cranium crusher. Don't kill me. I've never done anything bad. At most, I've played with women. Please don't kill me." "Should be quiet. I'm not here to kill you," Renaud said in a low voice. Then what do you want? Do you want money?" I'll give. Knight Shandu heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he heard Cranium Crusher continue. "Take me to your ancestor." Knight Shandu's face, which had just calmed down, turned pale again. "Didn't you say you won't kill me?" Not long after, night began to fall. In the room, Reynolds felt that the mana in his body had fully recovered. He took down the laptop that had been resting on his lap, closed the game interface, and stretched his back. "It's about time," Renaud muttered to himself. Every time his body was filled with magic power, it was the moment when Reynolds began to hone his magic skills. Even after what happened today, Renaud did not want to abandon this habit. Chapter 566. Just like what Roman said, Reynolds, who was usually lazy, was extremely hard-working and serious when it came to magic. The young man, who truly loved magic, couldn't give up the hard-won miracle. "Let's practice a new summoning today, if I can summon the fourth intermediate servant." Reynolds was looking forward to it, and he was ready to get out of bed. At that time, whoosh! The automatic door to Renault's room suddenly opened with a hurried sound. Reynolds was startled, and he looked at the door reflexively. Outside the door, a young girl was rushing in. Fo, who was lying on Reynolds's bed, immediately made a greeting. Mashu? Reynolds was also a little surprised. Senpai. Mashu, who was usually polite, didn't care about the reaction of the beast and the man. She gasped for breath and looked at Reynolds. At that moment, Reynolds had a bad feeling in his heart. Because in Mashu's beautiful eyes, there was an unprecedented emotion. So Mashu gasped and stared at Reynolds. After a while, Mashu said a sentence. Lens Shiba detected an anomaly. That sentence confirmed Reynolds's premonition. Chaldea, one of the corridors leading to the central control room. At that time, Reynolds and Mashu passed through that corridor and quickly ran in the direction of the central control room. Senpai, please hurry up. It's already fast. Mashu, who was running in the front, kept urging Renault, who was running as if he was about to die, which made Renault's heart filled with sadness. As a man, it was embarrassing to be urged by a woman to run faster, and he was gasping like a dead dog. I can't help it. My magic circuit is so good that it affects my body's function. Yes, it's not that I'm weak, it's all because I'm too good. Reynolds could only keep comforting himself like this. His footsteps were still unstable, and under Mashu's urging, he quickly ran to the central control room. Finally, the two came to the central control room after passing through an elevator. As soon as the automatic door opened, Reynolds, who was supported by Mashu, saw it. The anomaly is rising. The anomaly is continuing to rise. Try to control it. No. It's already beyond the limit. In the central control room, a group of staff who were operating the equipment in the command room let out panicked cries. At the same time, there were also faint cries of sorrow. Olga Marie, who had been hiding in her room and sulking, seemed to have been informed beforehand and had already arrived. She was having a heated discussion with the serious-looking Lev, with unprecedented anxiety on her face. In the center of the central control room, Chaldea's, which was suspended in mid-air like a huge globe, was producing abnormalities. It can't be? Looking at Chaldea's condition, Renault couldn't believe it. Chaldea's, which used to be shining with beautiful blue light and fluorescent fire of civilization, was constantly changing color. The people who saw this scene were not only Renault and Mashu, but also other people who received the news and came here. Could it be that? Those who came here whispered while staring in the direction of Chaldea's, and their expressions were quite dangerous. Of course, Roman also came here. I didn't expect it to worsen in such a short period of time. Roman, who came to the central control room, looked in the direction of Chaldea's, and after a while, he made such a rare calm statement. Doctor? Mashu was at a loss. Renault also turned his head and looked at Roman. After all, Roman's statement just now sounded like he knew the details. In other words, this change was not beyond Roman's expectation. At that moment, Renault asked, "Do you know something, brother?" Renault asked so bluntly. In this regard, Roman also looked at Renault, as if there was no need to hide, and sighed. Immediately, Roman told Renault one thing. In fact, as early as a few months ago, Chaldea's observers discovered that Chaldea's was changing color. A simple sentence made Renault understand the situation at once. It began to change color a few months ago? No wonder. No wonder Chaldea's, who used to carry out the observation mission in an orderly manner, suddenly kept summoning the appropriate people in the hall during this period of time. It turned out that it was not just because of the experiment and training, but also because the situation may develop in the worst direction. Chaldea's began to change color. That was not something that could be ignored. That environmental model of the Earth was a device that represented the state of the entire planet. Once it showed abnormalities, it meant that the planet had a problem. Could it be? Renault could not help but think of the worst situation. Mashu, who had been looking at Chaldeas, exclaimed in surprise. Senpai! When he heard that, Renault immediately turned his head and looked in the direction of Chaldeas. There, Chaldeas, which had been shining brightly, finally dimmed after a series of ups and downs. The entire central control room suddenly became silent. Everyone stared at the dark Chaldeas, and they were speechless. The light disappeared? Mashu's whisper came from a distant place, full of illusory feeling. Renault was also silent. As long as the fire of civilization in Chaldeas remained lit, it proved that human beings could live in peace for the next 100 years. Once it lost its light, it could only mean one thing. Human history is about to disappear. That was all there was to it. Olga Marie stared at Chaldeas, which lost its light, and her face was somewhat pale. However, Olga Marie did not lose her calm. Immediately start summoning the appropriate master candidates. Olga Marie gritted her teeth and issued an order related to the future of human beings. I want to see all the master candidates in the world gathered in Chaldeas within a month. That also meant, the battle is about to start? Renault whispered, with a complicated heart. Chapter 567. After that, all the technicians in Chaldea were summoned by Olga Marie to work overtime all night. For Chaldeas, which had lost its light, Chaldeas began a deep observation and came to a conclusion. The last time we can confirm the existence of the light of civilization is only 2019. What did that mean? It meant that human beings could only survive until 2019, and they would be completely extinct before 2020. After learning about that, almost everyone had only one thought. Impossible. That's right. Impossible. If human history will disappear before 2020, doesn't that mean that the next less than 2 years will be the last time human beings will survive? How is that possible? There is no possibility of economic collapse, and there is no sign of crustal change. How can human beings suddenly become extinct? That was simply inexplicable. In this regard, Lev gave an explanation. If the cause does not exist in the future, then it can only exist in the past. That is, in the past era, there was a sudden anomaly at some point in time, which led to the extinction of mankind. Therefore, Chaldea conducted a careful investigation of the intelligence in the past 2,000 years. Investigate those things that did not exist in the history so far. Investigate those foreign objects that did not exist in the Earth so far. They existed in violation of the normal spacetime order, had an impact on human reason, and then produced the changes of the era. That was the singularity. Spatial singularity. Point F. That was a singularity that existed in the past era after all the technicians in Chaldea investigated the history of the past 2,000 years. Chaldea assumed that this was the cause of the extinction of mankind. After learning that information, Olga Marie immediately made a decision. Send a proposal to the United Nations to obtain permission to transfer Reiki. That was the conclusion. Because Reiki transfer was a technology that could go to various eras and affect spacetime, if it was carried out casually, it may lead to changes in history. Therefore, to carry out a formal Reiki transfer, they must obtain permission from all countries in the world. Once this permission was issued, the suitable people who were summoned to Chaldea would become master candidates. As combat personnel, Reiko would be transferred to the Singularity Point F. At that time, the heroic spirit summoning system, Fate, would also be officially launched. It would try to summon servants, let master candidates form a contract with servants, and become a real master, command servants, and fight in singularities, eliminate the source of the disappearance of human history, restore the era, and complete the foundation of humanity. This will be the first official battle in Chaldea, and all master candidates must give me a proper attitude. Don't forget, you will be the key to the survival of human history. If you can't correct your attitude and realize the importance of this matter, then no matter how good this person is, I will not allow him to participate in the first battle in a month. Olga Marie said those words to the 9 suitable people who were currently in Chaldea, and then turned her eyes to Reynolds. There was no longer any of the anxiety and anger in his eyes. There was only a determination to struggle with all his might. Then Olga Marie said these words to Renaud. If you don't want to be serious, then don't come. That was Olga Marie's decision. After saying that, Olga Marie turned and left. The rest of the suitable people also looked at Reynolds with various thoughts in their eyes and left the central control room. In the end, Reynolds also left under Thompson and Roman's worried gaze. Walking in the corridor, Reynolds couldn't help but clench his fist. His mood was very complicated from beginning to end. Chaldea Underground Training Ground. This was the place provided by Chaldea for the suitable people to use. Although magicians basically have their own workshops and will not easily show their skills in other places, it was not impossible to practice and research magic in an open space. Therefore, Chaldea will provide a training ground like this. As long as an application is submitted, it can be used after the application is approved. Reynolds has been in Chaldea for a long time, and he was the first among the suitable people, so he naturally has the authority to use the training ground freely. Right now, Reynolds was shooting from here. Along with some fluctuations, pitch-black mana gathered at Reynolds's fingertips, forming a reddish-black light bullet. The next moment, the red-black light bullet was shot from Reynolds's fingertips, like a bullet, cutting through the air and landing on a target in front of him. Bang! With a heavy thud, the target was sent flying. Reynolds continued to aim at the target one by one, and kept shooting, hitting the target one by one. Not knowing how long it took, a voice came from behind Reynolds. As expected of Senpai. Behind Reynolds, Townsend had arrived at some point. Foe was standing on his shoulder, smiling at Reynolds. Senpai's Gander can cause substantial damage. It's very powerful. Gander. Gander was a magic from Northern Europe. Its essence was a curse. As long as you use your finger to point at the target, it can affect the target's health. Therefore, it was also called Een Bullet. Originally, this magic should be a non-lethal magic. Although it could cause physical abnormalities to the target, it would not cause direct damage. However, if it was practiced to a certain extent, it could also cause direct damage to the target. Because this magic was not particularly rare, Reynolds found it in Chaldea's library and learned it. This magic was also the only magic Reynolds mastered in addition to summoning. Of course, Reynolds also wanted to learn other magic. Unfortunately, except for summoning, Reynolds's talent in other magic was not very amazing. Therefore, Reynolds only learned Een Chi Bomb because he didn't want to bite off more than he could chew. After 3 years of practice, Renaud's Een Chi Bomb was able to cause direct damage, and its power was comparable to a bullet. It was not difficult for him to send an adult flying, let alone hit a target. In this regard, Reynolds did not get carried away. In addition to summoning, this is the only magic I can use. Reynolds didn't turn around and continued to shoot. He only replied with one sentence. Looking at Reynolds, Townsend hesitated for a while before plucking up the courage to ask. Chapter 568. Isn't Senpai going to participate in the first battle after a month? That sentence changed the atmosphere in the training ground. Bang! As if symbolizing his mood at this time, the red-black magic bullet heavily hit a target in a way that was more powerful than any of the previous shots, causing it to fly into the wall and directly shatter into pieces. Reynolds breathed a sigh of relief, as if he didn't want to continue shooting. He retracted his fingertips that had been releasing magic power. However, Reynolds still didn't look back and looked at Townsend. There was no other reason. If Townsend saw his current expression, Reynolds was not confident that he could hide his true thoughts. Although Reynolds said that, He didn't hide his inner thoughts at all and spoke out his answer. To be honest, I don't know. That was Reynolds's truest thought. At that moment, Reynolds's mind was filled with Roman's words. Chaldea is no longer the cruel facility you imagined, so, at least here, I hope you can let your guard down. Roman really hoped so, right? However, Reynolds still couldn't trust Chaldea. That was not only because of his disgust with the magician, but also because of Reynolds's past. In view of that, Reynolds really didn't want to cooperate with Chaldea's action. But, if the battle fails, there will be no future for mankind. Townsend hugged Foe, looked at Reynolds's back, and whispered, "Senpai, do you think it's okay?" That question was the key point that confused Reynolds. Was it okay? How could it be okay? Regardless of whether he could save the human race or not, Reynolds couldn't just watch Townsend and Roman die without doing anything. Not to mention, Reynolds didn't want to die. Not because of fear. As early as 14 years ago, Reynolds had already accurately recognized death. He had also long since given up on the fear that arose from it. However, Reynolds didn't want to let the life that survived because of a miracle wither so easily. If Singularity F was not repaired, not only Townsend and Roman, but even Reynolds himself would not be spared. On the one hand, Reynolds didn't want to cooperate with Chaldea's action due to his inner resistance. On the one hand, for the sake of Townsend, Roman, and himself, Reynolds couldn't just watch the foundation of humanity fail. The two feelings made Reynolds not know what choice to make. What should he do? At this time, Reynolds couldn't help but feel a little distressed. At that moment, Reynolds stopped thinking about his own question and turned to ask Townsend. "What about Townsend?" Reynolds asked. "Do you want to participate in the first battle?" Townsend was a little startled as he didn't expect Reynolds to suddenly ask him this question. However, after a while, Townsend replied, "If possible, I don't want to give up the opportunity to fight for the first time." This was Townsend's answer. Reynolds only had one thought about this. "That's really your style." This was the only thought Reynolds could make. Linley had been with Townsend for about 2 years at the very most. Reynolds believed that he knew Townsend's character quite well. Renaud turned around and looked at Townsend. Her pink shoulder-length hair hung down very smoothly, as if every strand of her hair could be seen clearly. Every line was distinct. One side of her bangs just covered one eye, and she wore a pair of flat-rimmed glasses on her face. She was wearing a white uniform with a short skirt. Her seemingly healthy thighs were wrapped in pantyhose, and she wore long boots. As for her figure, it was slim and graceful. Considering her age, she was undoubtedly too well developed. Such a young girl would often have a pitiful expression on her face that was full of seriousness and illusory. At first glance, this was an indifferent girl with an inconceivable atmosphere. In fact, Townsend was not cold, but she was not good at expressing her feelings. Like Reynolds, she had little experience in life, but she had a lot of knowledge. Usually, Townsend was a quiet person, and when she talked to others, she adopted a straightforward attitude and a habit of speaking, as if she was controlling herself. She would only speak when necessary, giving others a feeling that she was hard to approach. In fact, Townsend was a curious and proactive person. She would greet others, talk to others, and ask for their opinions. She was serious and hard-working, and was curious about the outside world. She was just a kind and pure girl who wanted to explore the wider world. As for an ordinary girl, it was natural that she would not like to fight. Therefore, Reynolds knew Townsend did not join the battle because she liked it. Quite the contrary, Townsend was afraid of fighting. It was just that she was forced to fight, so she wanted to work hard to overcome the difficulties. The same went for this first battle. Townsend only had one choice when faced with a battle that she was forced to fight. She would work hard to overcome the difficulties. This was something that only Reynolds knew about. Because of that, Reynolds had to ask, "Townsend, do you think this is okay?" Reynolds couldn't help but ask. The pure and kind girl before his eyes had the same past as Reynolds. Both of them were unbearable to look back on. Townsend's fate was even crueler than Reynolds. At least, Reynolds had been saved. But Townsend hadn't. This made Reynolds have to ask that question. "Don't you hate Chaldea?" Such a question made Townsend slightly widen her eyes. Then, Townsend showed a smile. Very shallow, very light, but very beautiful smile. "Yes, I don't hate Chaldea," Townsend replied with a smile. "Because it allowed me to meet my predecessor." The gratitude and warmth in her heartfelt words touched Reynolds's heart. Reynolds couldn't not understand the meaning of this sentence. This reminded Reynolds of the scene when he first met Townsend. Townsend seemed to recall the things at that time, and the expression on her face became more and more gentle. Seeing such an expression, Reynolds knew. He didn't have a second choice. "I'm really defeated by you." Reynolds also showed a smile. The distress in his heart had disappeared. Compared to the resistance to Chaldea and the magician, Reynolds didn't want to see the girl's smile disappear. This was Reynolds's truest thought now. Compared with this, the resistance in his heart was no longer important. Chapter 569. In any case, he couldn't let the girl in front of him fight alone. That's what Reynolds must do. "So, let's work together." "Townsend." "Yes, Senpai." In the training ground, the boy and the girl made a strong and powerful declaration to each other, one relaxed, and the other showed a surprised expression. Fo, who was lying in Townsend's arms, seemed to feel the bond and warmth between the two, and also made a sound. On this day, Reynolds made the decision to fight. In order to take back the future of mankind, he embarked on a long journey. In the following period of time, the entire Chaldea entered a state of complete chaos. All the technicians were mobilized by Olga Marie and concentrated in various facilities in Chaldea to investigate and observe the situation of Singularity Point F. They have been trying to summarize information and countermeasures. The staff were given a task one after another. Some went to the United Nations to obtain the official permission to transfer Reiki, and some began to go around the world according to Olga Marie's instructions, to gather talents suitable for Reiki transfer and master Reiki transfer. In order to ensure the success of the first battle after a month, Olga Marie could be said to be desperate. At this time, as long as it can increase the odds of winning the battle, no matter what it is, Olga Marie will do it. Even as Olga Marie's most trusted technician, Rafe also devoted himself to work and disappeared. Even Roman was wantonly driven, in order to keep the busy staff from collapsing due to mental and physical exhaustion. He was so busy that he almost didn't have time to eat. Roman himself was so sad. There is still Magic Melly's update this month. Roman screamed so miserably that he didn't even say a word. In the whole month, he only saw Reynolds a few times. The rest of the time, he was running around every corner of Chaldea, taking care of the health of all the people in Chaldea. By the way, the so-called Magic Melly referred to the blog of an online idol. Roman was a die-hard fan of this blog. He loved it so much that he even treated it as spiritual food. Every day, he would linger on this blog for a long time. He was keen on constantly posting comments and then being scolded by the other party as punishment. This made Reynolds, who was also keen on surfing the internet, feel somewhat unimpressed. He had considered several times whether or not to sever ties with this embarrassing fellow. Under such circumstances, in a month's time, the Master Reiki was constantly summoned to Chaldea. As for these suitable individuals, they were naturally drilled. In order to achieve a brilliant result in the first battle, Olga Marie almost madly gave instructions. All master candidates must undergo a certain degree of simulation training. I will issue the permission. From now on, every master candidate can freely participate in the simulation battle. No, they must participate in the simulation battle training every day. In summary, while the technicians and staff were busy, the suitable people, including Reynolds, were also unable to rest. They threw themselves into the simulation battle more frequently than before and underwent rigorous training. Of course, this made many master candidates who had just arrived in Chaldea cry. After all, if they couldn't adapt to the infiltration of Reiki, it would be a great burden on the brain. Under such frequent simulation battles, those who had just gathered in Chaldea and had not been trained, of course, would cry. On the contrary, Reynolds, whose physical strength was far lower than others, was active in the simulation battle. At least, that's what people in Chaldea said about Reynolds. Number 1 simulation battle evaluation is full score. Is it full score again this time? Didn't that guy always give up after passing? Did he start to work hard recently? In front of the doomsday, that guy is nervous, right? If only he could be so diligent in normal times. Those were the comments given by the people in Chaldea after hearing Reynolds's performance. Even those master candidates were looking at Reynolds in all sorts of ways. After learning these things, those who knew Reynolds also had different reactions. As expected of a senior, this was the reaction that Townsend, who had been fighting with Renault every day, was proud of. Are you finally willing to take it seriously? That was the laughter of Roman, who was very busy. Is this Reynolds's real ability? That was Rafe's whisper when he occasionally heard others' comments about Reynolds. It should be like this from the beginning, idiot. Olga Marie, who had heard of this from the report, snorted coldly. As a result, it was those who had gathered in Chaldea in the past month who were disdainful of it. It's just a wild magician who came from nowhere. It's probably because he's more suitable. But that kind of physique doesn't prove anything at all. Yes. We, the noble successors from the Magic Association, are the real elite. That was the reaction of those who were suitable. Magic Association. It was a fraternity where people who studied magic as a subject gathered. Regardless of nationality or school, it was formed by people who learned magic, managed and hid magic, and developed it as a mission. That was the Magic Association. In the magic world, the status of the Magic Association could be said to be unparalleled. Disregarding everything else, just the history of its existence alone was already more than 2,000 years old. Therefore, except for a few magicians like Reynolds, who had been staying in Chaldea and silently learning magic, the magicians in the magic world usually belonged to this association. That made the Magic Association gather almost all the famous magicians from ancient times to the present. Among them, Olga Marie's family was included. In other words, strictly speaking, Chaldea was also a facility belonging to the Magic Association. The more famous the magician was, the better the magic circuit, and the more powerful the magician was. That was why the magicians in the association generally valued bloodline above everything else. In the eyes of these people, Reynolds, who wasn't well known, was naturally a wild kid that had started out halfway, and it caused them to feel disdain and contempt towards him from the bottom of their hearts. Of course, not everyone was like that. Not all of the magicians who had Reiki transfer adaptability and master adaptability came from the association. Some of them were ordinary people who had magic circuit. Chapter 570. 38 people were selected from the famous magic clans. 10 people were selected from ordinary people. There will be a total of 48 of them gathered in Chaldea. Rely on these 48 masters to lay a new foundation for human history and return human history to normal. Olga Marie, who calculated the combat power, once announced this to Reynolds and others. In this way, a month passed. In the end, all 48 masters were gathered in Chaldea. It was also on this day that the battle began. Clap, Reynolds closed the laptop in his hand. His fingers gently stroked its surface, curled his lips, and smiled. I hope I can come back again. Leaving such words, Reynolds left his room and went to the door. Here, the obedient juniors have been waiting for a long time. Good morning, senpai. Good morning, Townsend. Did you play games all night last night? Well, senpai, don't worry, I won't mess it up. The two had a simple conversation at the door. Immediately, they left together and went to the control room. Today, the whole Chaldea was filled with a faint tension, and the air began to carry a trace of pressure. Senpai Townsend seemed to feel the tension. Not only his face was slightly tense, but he also couldn't help but call Reynolds. Renaud, who was yawning and looking completely different from Townsend, glanced at Townsend and saw the tense expression on his face. Relax. Reynolds suddenly yawned and said, Don't be so nervous, the simulation battle has been done many times, there's no problem. If it had been Olga Marie, she would have definitely complained about his careless attitude. However, Townsend was affected by Reynolds's attitude, and his mood was slightly relaxed. Clearly seeing this scene, Reynolds smiled in his heart and relaxed. Obviously, Reynolds deliberately made this performance for Townsend's sake, so that Townsend could relax. People are creatures that can be influenced by each other. Once the people around you are nervous, you will be more or less nervous. However, once the people around him were sloppy, it was impossible to be serious. Using this principle, Reynolds deliberately guided Townsend, who was not very mature yet. Although the two of them were of the same age and lacked life experience, Renaud was better at devising strategies and countermeasures than the pure and kind Townsend. Naturally, he knew how to make Townsend relax in this situation. This was also because Reynolds was very clear about his position. As a summoning magician who manipulated familiars to fight, his physical strength could not keep up, but his mind must be clear. The battle would be left to the servants and familiars. His mission was to command and support from the rear. Only then could he maximize his combat strength. Reynolds had always been very clear about this, so he had been absorbing all kinds of knowledge to enrich his mind, making it easier for him to organize tactics and command in all kinds of situations. This battle was the same. In terms of fighting, as long as it's a servant, a magician won't be able to keep up. As masters, what we should do is not to go to the front lines, but to command from the rear. If you don't do that, you'll just be a burden. With this understanding, Reynolds naturally knew what he should do the most. In addition, he was also a summoning magician, and his combat method was also to control familiars from the rear. Thinking of this, Reynolds couldn't help but look forward to it. I don't know what kind of hero will be summoned by fate and contracted with me. When he thought of this, Reynolds was really looking forward to it. Love magic, love miracles, that's the boy, Lorelei Agneson. At this time, so you're here. The voice sounded, and Reynolds took the lead to stop going to the control room. Professor. Townsend also stopped in his tracks, but unlike Reynolds, he bowed to the newcomer in a serious manner. The person who came was Rafe. I've been looking for you for a long time, it's great that you're here. Rafe was leaning on a decorative cane, with a normal smile, approaching them. Reynolds didn't greet Rafe, he just looked at him. For some reason, Reynolds always felt that. This guy is even more creepy now. Reynolds couldn't open his mouth to greet Rafe, he could only remain silent. Rafe, who didn't know what Reynolds was thinking, walked in front of them. Are you ready to go to the control room? Lev said enthusiastically. Mary is preparing to give a briefing to the master candidates who have gathered in Chaldea. You two are the only ones left. Hurry up. Reynolds raised his eyebrows when he heard that. Could it be that the professor is looking for us? Reynolds asked tentatively. In response, Rafe gave a straightforward answer. After all, the two of you are not selected from a famous magic sect, nor are you ordinary people from the general society. You belong to the Chaldea from the beginning, and you both have more precious talents than the average person. On such an important day, you can't be absent. Although the answer was straightforward, Reynolds still felt Rafe's intention. Yes, on such an important day, you can't be absent. Rafe smiled so frankly. However, that smile and those words made Reynolds feel a chill crawl up his spine. However, before Reynolds could find out, Rafe changed the topic and said, "By the way, do you know where Romani is? I'm looking for him too." Hearing Rafe's words, Townsend was a little surprised and said, "Isn't the doctor in the control room? He was here just now." Rafe shook his head and said, "It's just that the recent overtime made Romani have been shouting in the control room, 'I want to take a vacation. I want to see Magic Melly's update.'" "Let me take a break." Mary got angry and said that if he was there, the atmosphere of the battle couldn't be lifted at all, so she drove him away. It was Romani's style. That was Reynolds and Townsend's first thought. That being said, today's battle is very important. In order to avoid physical problems, we still need Romani's care. Rafe asked Reynolds, "Do you know where your brother is, Reynolds?" Chapter 571. To be honest, Reynolds really knew. Not long ago, Roman had rushed into Reynolds's room and shouted at him, "Today I'm going to be lazy. If someone is looking for me, remember to say that I'm not here." Then, Roman hid in Reynolds's bathroom. In other words, now, Roman was hiding in Reynolds's room. "So, I don't know." Reynolds simply said to Lev, "Maybe he's hiding somewhere to be lazy." "Is that so?" Lev was silent for a while, then said helplessly, "There is no other way, the battle is about to start, we will go first, and see if we can contact Romani later." After that, Lev took the lead as if he wanted to lead the way. Townsend was about to follow, but he saw Reynolds standing in the same place, hesitating. "Senpai?" Townsend tilted his head and asked, "What's wrong?" "No." Fong Li shook his head and pretended to be relaxed. "Nothing, let's follow." "Yes." Although Townsend still had some doubts, he didn't ask. The two followed Lev and went to the control room again. However, Reynolds was no longer as undisciplined as he was just now. Staring at Lev's back, Reynolds's eyes flashed. "I always feel that something is wrong." In Reynolds's mind, there was only this thought left. Unfortunately, things didn't stop because of Reynolds's mind. Not long after, the three of them came to the control room and began to take their places. Chaldea, Central Control Room. When Reynolds and Mashu arrived, all the suitable people in Chaldea had gathered. All the suitable people were sitting in rows of seats in the center of the control room, silently waiting for the battle meeting to begin. Just in front of these people, Olga Marie was already standing there. Too slow. As usual, Olga Marie shouted at Reynolds and Mashu, "Hurry up and sit down. Don't waste time." Olga Marie's voice was more nervous than usual, which told others that today's anxiety level had broken the record. If it was in the past, Olga Marie would never easily let go of Reynolds, who was always unpleasant to her eyes. This proved that Olga Marie didn't even have the time to quarrel with Reynolds. Looking at Olga Marie, who crossed her arms and stared at him, Reynolds couldn't help but feel sad. "Why are you so angry every day? I wonder if your menopause has come early, say." Senior Reynolds's slander made Mashu afraid of being heard. She quickly pulled Reynolds back to his seat. The two of them were seated in the first row. There were less than 10 seats in the first row. Those who were able to sit here were the 9 people who were already in Chaldea a month ago. These 9 people naturally attracted the attention of everyone present. "Welcome to Chaldea, the Secret Service. I am the director, Olga Marie Anamusfia." While the rest of the people were looking at Renaud and Mashu in the first row with disrespectful eyes, Olga Marie began to speak. "Although there are many things I want to say, to be exact, I feel very uneasy when I see all of you like this. However, it is undeniable that this battle requires the strength of suitable people like you who have been excavated from all over the world to successfully complete it. Therefore, I will not beat around the bush and get straight to the point." Olga Marie seemed to suppress the anxiety in her heart and spoke in a calm voice. "Presumably, after coming to Chaldea, you should have more or less understood the current situation, right? These words made the master candidates present look at each other. After all, it was such a big thing. Mankind was about to usher in the end. Even if it was the biggest secret now, it was impossible for the outside world to know. But after coming to Chaldea, the people here must have already known it. Therefore, Olga Marie said this. I don't care whether you heard it from others or from other channels. Now, how serious our situation is, as long as you can clearly understand this point, it is enough. And if you still don't understand the seriousness of the situation, then let me repeat it to you. Olga Marie announced mercilessly. Next, your battle will determine whether mankind can survive in the future. When these words came out, the audience was silent. Olga Marie continued to announce coldly. If your battle is successful, then the history of mankind can be repaired, and the future of mankind can be guaranteed. If your battle fails, then mankind will be completely finished. There are only these two results, and there will never be a third. Now, do you understand how heavy your mission is? Hearing this, everyone's face began to tense slightly. A sense of nervousness spread in the control room. Reynolds also felt that Mashu's body next to him was tense, and her delicate face also changed. He couldn't help but curse in his heart. It's not easy to make Mashu relax a little, but this woman is still so troublesome. Reynolds had forgotten that a month ago, he was the most troublesome person in Chaldea. At any rate, Olga Marie seemed to be satisfied with the tension. Since you are already aware, then let's begin the real explanation of the battle. Olga Marie's expression began to become serious. Immediately, Olga Marie finally began to explain. After this period of observation and investigation, Chaldea finally confirmed the location of the singularity point F. After that, Olga Marie snapped her fingers. Chaldea, which was in the front, suddenly turned around and faced everyone in the room. At the same time, there was a screen in front of it like a lens, magnifying one of the points of the planet model and presented it in front of everyone. Reynolds raised his head and looked at it. What appeared there was an island country located in the Far East. Olga Marie pointed to one of the locations in the island country. There is a city here, called Fuyuki City. Fuyuki City. When this name was mentioned, the expressions of some of the master candidates from the famous magic sects changed slightly. Even Reynolds narrowed his eyes, and whispered to Mashu on the side. Senpai, isn't Fuyuki City? Well, let's continue to listen. After exchanging opinions, the two continued to listen to the explanation. Olga Marie continued to explain as if she expected this reaction. Chapter 572. The history from 2004 until 2018 does not exist here. That is to say, Fuyuki City at this point in time has been separated from the torrent of time and became a whole, a singularity. Your task is to transfer Reiko to Fuyuki City in 2004 and find out the reason for the disappearance of human beings in the future. Olga Marie retracted her hand from the map and looked around at the masters. This is the first Reiko transfer battle since the establishment of Chaldea. For this reason, we have no clue what kind of problems and difficulties you will encounter. However, as long as we don't cross this hurdle, human beings will have no future. So, your battle can only succeed, and failure is absolutely not allowed. Olga Marie spoke again in a loud voice after giving such an order that left no room for explanation. Now, as the current director of Chaldea, after an hour, the first Reiko transfer experiment will be officially carried out. To be conservative, we will select the top 8 people in the simulation battle so far to form Team A and send them to the singularity first. The members of Team A have received sufficient training in Chaldea a month ago. They are talents who can stand on their own. They will set off first to provide security for the follow-up personnel in the singularity. During Team A's operation, the members of Team B and below need to be ready to set off after the second experiment. After that, Olga Marie clapped her hands. After the battle meeting, about 10 minutes passed. In those 10 minutes, the master candidates have already landed on their respective capsules and waited for orders to enter them at any time to perform Reiki transfer. Renaud was also waiting next to his own capsule. It's really annoying. Next to his capsule, Renaud was muttering with an unhappy face. On the other side, Mashu, who was also waiting next to her capsule, said as if she had accepted the fact. I didn't expect that Senpai would be excluded from Team A's list. Yes, Renaud was not on Team A's list. A month ago, there were a total of 9 masters in Chaldea who were eligible for the position. Team A, on the other hand, would select the top 8 contestants in the simulated battle. In this way, one of them would naturally be left alone. Unfortunately, this lone person was none other than Reynolds, who asked Senior not to be serious in the previous simulation battles. Mashu helplessly explained the reason. This was the fundamental reason. Although in this month, Reynolds was unprecedentedly active, almost every simulation battle got full mark. But before this, Reynolds had never taken the simulation battle seriously. He didn't just get a pass, he didn't even get a pass. Sometimes he was absent or late. All of these were recorded in Chaldea's computer as real result. As such, Reynolds's result was ranked last, and he was successfully left alone. Actually, it didn't matter if he was alone or not. With the people from Team A paving the way for him, Reynolds was happy and relaxed. However, Mashu was one of the members of Team A. How could Reynolds feel at ease letting this girl, who was afraid of battle, lead the way to the singularity in advance? It's all right, Senior. Mashu seemed to see the worry in Reynolds's heart, so she said very seriously. I will definitely pave the way for Senior and persevere until Senior arrives. This was not flaunting, but being strong. Even if she was afraid of fighting, Mashu did not intend to escape from the battle, let alone hide behind Reynolds. In the face of this girl's strength, Reynolds could not say anything to refute. There is no other way. Reynolds could only say to Mashu, then you have to be careful. Yes, I know. Mashu nodded heavily. Reynolds reluctantly stopped complaining, turned his head and looked at the direction of the command room. There, a group of Chaldea technicians were in full swing, performing the final adjustments of the Reiki transfer, constantly manipulating various instruments. Olga Marie was also wandering among the technicians, constantly giving instructions. Reynolds glanced at the situation and then frowned. Senior? Seeing Reynolds's abnormality again, Mashu could not help but ask. But this time, Reynolds had no spare energy to respond to Mashu. Reynolds just stared at the direction of the command room. His expression was extremely serious. Because there was a person who Reynolds had to pay attention to. Where is Rafe? It was Rafe. After carefully searching the interior of the command room, Reynolds still did not find Rafe's figure. This reminded Reynolds of the strange feeling he felt when he first met Rafe. This strange feeling, now with Rafe's disappearance, grew stronger and stronger in Reynolds's heart. In the end, it grew to the point that Reynolds was restless. How could that man suddenly disappear at such an important moment? The more he thought about it, the more Reynolds felt concerned. So, Senior? Where are you going? Mashu's horrified voice sounded. At the same time, the rest of the master candidates also cast a stunned and surprised look at Reynolds one by one. Reynolds did not care about this. While running out of the control room, he shouted at Mashu without looking back. I will be back soon. After shouting, Reynolds rushed out of the control room under Mashu's call and the whispers of the crowd. Faintly, it seemed to be accompanied by Olga Marie's roar. Lorelei Agnes. Reynolds ran out of the control room without looking back when he heard his name being yelled out. Ha! 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 Not long after running out of the control room, Reynolds felt that his stamina was almost exhausted. If it were any other time, Reynolds would have already complained and directly fell to the ground. But this time, Reynolds kept consuming his stamina, running in the corridor of Chaldea, and even used the bird-summoning magic to summon dozens of birds and scattered them in Chaldea. Reynolds ran and searched while dividing his spirit into dozens of parts, sharing his senses with the tamed monsters, looking for Rafe's trace. Being able to divide his senses into dozens of parts like this while doing his own thing, it showed that Reynolds's ability was excellent. But not here? Reynolds, who had one hand on the wall, couldn't help but feel a little surprised. How could there not be? Chapter 573. Obviously, he had divided his senses into dozens of parts and searched the whole Chaldea with the group of tamed birds, but he couldn't even find Lev's trace. Did he hide in some important facility or workshop, or did he just leave Chaldea? The former was an important place, so it was generally set up with a defense system and enchantment, and the tamed demons couldn't get in. Not to mention the latter, once Rafe really left Chaldea, it would be impossible to find him. No, that's not the problem. Why at such an important moment, Rafe not only left the control room, but also disappeared? A bad premonition has been growing in Reynolds's heart. Unfortunately, Reynolds's premonition was only accurate when it came to bad things. Therefore, that thing happened. For Reynolds and the people closest to him, it was enough to decide their fate. Boom! A muffled sound suddenly resounded without any warning, making the whole Chaldea seem to be shaking, and there was a rumbling sound. What happened? Reynolds couldn't help but be surprised. In the next second, an alarm sounded throughout Chaldea. There is an emergency, there is an emergency. There is a fire in the central power station and the central control room. The wall in the central area will be blocked in 240 seconds. Please leave from the second gate quickly. Repeat. The central power station and the cold and ruthless alarm sounded, and the whole Chaldea began to deal with the fire under the flashing red light. Reynolds's mind was completely blank. Fire? Control room? These two words flashed through Reynolds's mind. Before he could react, Reynolds ran wildly in the direction of the control room. Because there were people who were very important to Reynolds. Mashu! Reynolds screamed from his throat and ran to the control room. Someday in the future, Reynolds would certainly make such an evaluation of himself today. This is the first and the last time in my life that I have to go beyond my physical limit. That was because no matter how tired and weak his body was, the anxiety in his heart still made Reynolds rush to the central control room without caring about anything else. He was so anxious that he didn't even have the energy to summon his familiar. He could only rush forward without stopping. After 240 seconds, the wall in the central area would be completely sealed off. If he didn't rush to the central area before that, Reynolds would never be able to enter that place, let alone rush to that cute junior side. Therefore, Reynolds was only left with regret. Why did he leave the control room? Why look for Rafe? He had already made up his mind to stay by that girl's side. If I'm still there, damn it! Realizing that his thoughts had started to turn negative due to uneasiness and anxiety, Reynolds hurriedly shook his head, shaking off the negative emotions and the sweat on his forehead. Now is not the time to blame yourself. The most important thing now was to find Mashu. He allowed his body to be driven by such emotions. Reynolds seemed to want to squeeze out all the strength in his body and finally rushed to the front of the control room. Chee! The automatic door suddenly opened with a whistle-like effect, telling Reynolds that he had successfully arrived. However, the next moment, the scene that entered his eyes made Reynolds stop. Red. Hot red. The control room, which used to be cold and full of mechanical feeling, was now covered by a fiery red flame. Pa! 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 The scalding hot pebbles kept rolling in every corner of the room. Bang! The concrete blocks that fell from the ceiling made a muffled sound. The entire control room was covered in flames, as if it was completely blown up and turned into ruins. In such a situation, the alarm was still ringing. It has been confirmed that the power part has stopped, the power generation is insufficient. Switching to the backup power source, there is an abnormality, please manually switch. There are 90 seconds left before the wall is completely sealed off. The staff in the central area, please go to the second gate as soon as possible. Hearing this, Reynolds finally reacted. Mashu! Renault shouted at the surroundings and rushed into the fire, ignoring the rising temperature. Mashu! Mashu! Where are you? Mashu! Answer me if you hear me! Reynolds shouted as he kept rushing in. Along the way, Reynolds also saw a capsule that was like a pillar that was pushed down, leaning in every corner. Renault looked for them one by one, but what he saw was a master candidate lying in a capsule one by one. However, they all fainted one by one. Seeing this, Reynolds somewhat understood. When the fire broke out, did the master candidates already enter the capsule? That was probably Olga Marie's order, right? Although Reynolds had run out of the control room before the battle, he knew that woman's style. Even if Reynolds was absent, she would not delay the important first battle just because of Reynolds's problem alone. She would definitely continue to give orders in a fit of anger while preparing for the spiritual droplet transfer. Thanks to that, the masters who entered the capsule didn't seem to die because of the sudden fire, and they maintained their life activities through the capsule's protection. So, Mashu was most likely among them, and she did not die because of the fire. Thinking of that, Reynolds thanked Olga Marie for the first time and turned to look for Mashu's capsule. Unfortunately, this time, Reynolds guessed wrong. Phoo! Just when Renault was desperately looking for Mashu's capsule, he heard a familiar voice. Reynolds quickly turned his head and saw a white creature standing on a piece of concrete wreckage. Foe! Why are you here? Reynolds couldn't help but be stunned. Foe should never appear in front of people, so it should never appear in the control room full of Chaldea's masters and technicians. Phoo! Ignoring Reynolds's surprise, Foe continued to shout, turned around, and ran in a direction. Seeing that, Reynolds's heart moved. Could it be? Reynolds rushed in the direction Foe ran. It didn't take long for Reynolds to stop again. His mind, however, became completely blank. Phoo! Foe called out from under a huge lump of muddy soil. However, it wasn't yelling at Reynolds. It was yelling at the young lady whose lower body was pressed down by a huge chunk of mud. Her lower body had already turned into a pool of blood. Predecessor? The girl's voice was like a bubble that was about to burst, it sounded so illusory. Chapter 574. The person Reynolds was desperately looking for seemed to notice his arrival, and she raised her head with great difficulty and slowly looked in his direction. The glasses she used to wear on her face were broken. Her eyes, which used to be full of seriousness, couldn't be gathered. Reynolds's blank mind was unable to produce any thoughts at all as he was stared at by the pair of eyes whose pupils were dilated, as if he could no longer see the things in front of him clearly. It wasn't until half a second later that Reynolds couldn't help but shout, "Why didn't you enter the capsule, Mashu?" With that, Reynolds almost shook his body and rushed to Mashu's side. In this regard, Mashu didn't feel any pain and she smiled. Because Senpai said he would come back soon, that's it? In order to wait for Reynolds to come back, Mashu didn't enter the capsule to prepare for Reiko transfer, and she eventually became the victim of this sudden fire. Reynolds clenched his fists, gritted his teeth, and could only gasp violently to suppress the intense emotions in his heart. "I'll get you out first." After suppressing his emotions, Reynolds activated the magic circuit in his body and let his magical power surge. Summon demonic ants. That was one of the 3 magics Reynolds learned that could summon mid-level servants. The surging magical power suddenly formed a magic square, and ants as huge as dogs were summoned. Kacha, 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 the ants rubbed their fong-like mouthparts, making a harsh sound like nails rubbing glass. Reynolds manipulated the demonic ants to scatter around the huge mixed mud block and begin to move it. Boom! More than 10 demonic ants displayed an unimaginable strength. They pushed away a huge chunk of mud that was bigger than a room and rolled it into the fire at the side, causing a roar. "Senpai? Don't talk. I'll take you out now." Reynolds squandered his physical strength that had already reached the limit, deliberately not looking at Mashu's miserable lower body, and was ready to carry Mashu on his back. As long as he took Mashu out, Reynolds believed that his lazy brother would have a way to save her. Just when Reynolds was about to move Mashu to the automatic door of the control room and was about to go out, "The wall is activated. Central region, seal off." Amidst the cold and merciless announcement, a door rose from the top, bottom, left, and right of the automatic door. They clamped together and sealed the control room. Reynolds stopped for the third time. Looking at the sealed automatic door in front of him, he was speechless. Bang! Bang bang! As the raging fire gradually grew stronger, more and more rocks fell from the ceiling. It was as if the ceiling was about to collapse, causing the entire control room to become shaky and on the verge of collapse, causing bursts of explosive sound. Reynolds and Mashu both looked at the completely closed door in front of them and fell into silence. Reynolds understood. Whether it was himself or Mashu, they could not leave this place. The door of the control room was specially made, and it was very well designed for magic. Even the most powerful magician would not be able to break it with brute force. Even if they were to use physical means, it would be very difficult to break this door that was stronger than steel. Unless he could summon a high-level familiar, it was worth a try. Otherwise, Reynolds wouldn't be able to escape with his current strength. And if he couldn't escape from here, he would die. Not only Mashu couldn't be saved, but even Reynolds himself would be swallowed by the fire and lose his hard-won life. This was the current situation. For a while, Reynolds didn't know how to react. As for Mashu, her voice sounded. "I'm sorry, Senpai. It's all because of me." Her voice was so fragile that it seemed like it would disappear at any time, and the guilt contained in the voice made people feel distressed. However, for some reason, when Reynolds heard this voice, he felt calm. Obviously, he was about to die, but his mood was incredibly calm. And his feelings were even more simple. "Well, there's nothing I can do about it." Reynolds's voice returned to its usual casual tone, and he smiled as if he was relaxed. This made the thousands of words in Mashu's heart dissipated and turned into a weak but exceptionally beautiful smile. "Senpai. You're really a senpai." Mashu only had this mood left. The raging fire grew stronger again, swallowing Reynolds and Mashu's escape route. Reynolds held Mashu and sat in front of the sealed door, looking at the sea of fire in front of him. "Senpai." Not knowing how long it took, Mashu's weak voice sounded again. "Remember when we first met? Do you remember?" This sentence immediately pulled Reynolds's memories back to the past. That was 2 years ago. At that time, Reynolds had been in Chaldea for a year. As the best master candidate in the current record, Reynolds was welcomed by many people when he came to Chaldea. But in that year, Reynolds did not cooperate with Chaldea, which gradually eroded Chaldea's patience, and made his interpersonal relationships in Chaldea fall to the lowest point. To put it bluntly, except for Roman, no one else was close to Reynolds at that time. At that time, this was something that Reynolds could not have wished for more. "Instead of wasting my time with these guys who are secretly conducting some inhuman magic experiments, I might as well play a game." Reynolds sincerely held these ideas, and at the same time, he also held the resistance to Chaldea and lived alone. Sometimes he practiced magic in places where others didn't know. Sometimes he would be alone in his room playing games. Except for Roman, who came in person to ask Reynolds to go out and cooperate with some inspections, Reynolds did not step out of the door. This was Reynolds's life in Chaldea 2 years ago. A life of complete solitude. Until one day, her name is Mashu Gillett, and she will live in Chaldea like you in the future. You have to get along well. Roman suddenly came to him with a girl who was about the same age as Reynolds and introduced the girl standing next to him. Reynolds still remembered Mashu at that time. Her short hair was no different from today's. Her delicate face was no different from today's. Her wonderful atmosphere was no different from today's. Her intellectual appearance was no different from today's. Chapter 575. The only difference was that he had a slightly immature appearance and a pair of pure eyes that were so calm that it was abnormal. Reynolds knew that gaze. It was the same gaze he had when he was 2 years old, before he obtained a miracle. Thus, Reynolds understood. The girl in front of him was the same as his past self. Both of them had succumbed to their fate and accepted it. So, even if Reynolds didn't know what happened to Avina at that time, Reynolds knew that the girl in front of him was walking the path he had walked before, and didn't treat cruelty as cruelty. The moment he understood this, Reynolds could no longer stay by his side alone. Just like how he accepted Roman, Reynolds, who had always rejected others, accepted the girl in front of him. At the same time, Avina also accepted the boy in front of her. Because at that time, Reynolds said something to Avina. In that case, I am your senior. This sentence also pried open Avina's heart. This was the scene when the boy and girl first met. Until now, I still haven't forgotten Senior's words, in the fire, only Avina's weak but peaceful voice, as if it had some warmth, clearly entered Reynolds's ears. For me at that time, Senior was really dazzling. Everyone was like that, right? People would have a kind of longing for someone who was like them, but who had done something they couldn't do. In Avina's heart, Reynolds was such a person. Their past was similar, and in the eyes of others, they were both cruel. However, Reynolds obtained a miracle and escaped from this fate. So, as a girl who hadn't obtained a miracle, Avina felt that this senior was very dazzling, and that was natural. Because of this, Avina could tell anyone from the bottom of her heart. To be able to meet Senior is really great. The girl's honesty made Reynolds's heart become extremely complicated. His words were like this. I am just luckier than you. This was the truth. Reynolds was just luckier than Avina. Even if a miracle happened, it wasn't something that Reynolds had fought for himself, but a gift that appeared out of nowhere. If this wasn't good luck, then what was? But, thanks to this, I was able to meet Avina. In other words, it's great to be able to meet you. Renault's words with a slight chuckle made Avina completely relax. Senior, Avina involuntarily used the last of her strength to hold Reynolds's hand. Reynolds immediately grabbed it back, as if he was holding it tightly in his hand, and continued to exert strength. Under such circumstances, the fire engulfed the entire control room. However, at that moment the mechanical voice of the system sounded. Detected that the system experiment is in progress. Manual operation stopped. Please resume operation in 3 seconds. No recovery in operation. Switching from manual operation to automatic operation. Continue the experiment. Begin the search for the master. The master in the capsule is detected to be in an abnormal state, and the only master list is number 1, and number 1 is set as the main subject of the experiment. Anti-summoning system, start. Time returned to the second before the fire engulfed the room. Holding the heavily injured Avina's hand tightly, Reynolds's heart was filled with determination. That's the only way. Reynolds couldn't help but clench his hand with miracle. Reynolds actually had a way to get out of the current crisis. That was to use the power of miracle to open the door to another world and leave the current time and space, thus avoiding the immediate crisis. It's just, this power is not something that can be used casually. As mentioned before, if you want to open the door to another world other than the soul, you need to pay a price. In addition, there was no way to open the door to another world other than Reynolds. That was to say, even if Rayner could be saved by this method, It would only be Rainer alone, and Avina couldn't pass through the gate alone. Even if he could go to another world through the door, how to save the seriously injured Avina was also a problem. After all, Avina's injury couldn't be delayed. On the other side of the door, there was something that could heal Avina's injury. Reynolds couldn't think that way. But that's the only way now. If he didn't use this method, he would die. If he used this method, there was still a chance. So, did Reynolds have a second choice other than using this method? As for how to let Avina pass through the gate of another world that was only open to him in theory, Reynolds also had a way. Although he didn't want to use this method. But there was no other choice. Just as Reynolds was about to make up his mind, Reiki transfer start. As Chaldea's system voice fell, Reynolds only felt that his existence turned into particles, and in a dazzling rotating brilliance, he entered a passage. That was a passage to another time and space. Reiki transfer? Reynolds only had time to take a breath, and then a dizziness took over his consciousness. When his consciousness returned to his head, and the dizziness disappeared, he didn't know how long it would take. When his vision was fully restored, the scene in front of him entered Reynolds's eyes. Reynolds was stunned. What appeared in front of him was a ruin that was no different from the control room in Chaldea. Flame-like red light wrapped around the collapsed buildings. The road like a deserted street stood in all directions. In front of him was a town that turned into ruins and was still burning. This is? Reynolds tried to get ready to grasp the current situation. At that moment, a tingling sensation suddenly came from the back of Reynolds's right hand, which attracted Reynolds's attention. When Reynolds saw the scene on the back of his right hand, a surprised expression appeared on his face. He saw that on the back of Reynolds's right hand, a striking red pattern was branded there. There were a total of 3 lines, as if 3 rings were linked together to form a pattern. From that pattern, Reynolds could feel a huge surge of magical power. That made Reynolds determine what the pattern on the back of his hand was. Is it a spellcaster? Chapter 576. This was an extremely precious command right, a proof that belonged exclusively to the master. It would be connected to the magic circuit of the magician. As long as the magician gave an order to it, it could be used as a kind of magic resource to give a certain degree of order to the servants that were contracted with the magician. In view of this, the command spell could be used to strengthen the servants contracted with him, and it could also be used to heal the servants' injuries. If it was a good magician, he could even use the command spell to bind the servants with a spell similar to a curse. And its appearance naturally meant, a servant formed a contract with me? This was the only explanation for the command incantation. It can't be? At this moment, Reynolds was truly at a loss. If it was in the past, Reynolds would have been overjoyed by this situation. After all, forming a contract with a real servant and using the heroic spirit summoning system as a master had always been Reynolds's dream. This wish of his had actually been realized in such a manner, causing Reynolds to completely forget his excitement and could only fall into a daze. Fortunately, Reynolds was a master who specialized in summoning magic. He quickly reacted to this sudden situation. Now is not the time to think about this. Reynolds shifted his attention away from the command incantation on the back of his hand and looked around in panic. Where's Avina? Where did Avina go? This was what he should be thinking about right now. Recalling the touch of the girl who was gradually losing her body temperature in his arms just a second ago, Reynolds immediately prepared to run forward. Unfortunately, this action was stopped in the next instant. Reynolds, who was about to rush out, suddenly froze on the spot. In front of a pair of eyes, at the edge of the abandoned town, a shooting star appeared. Whoosh 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 whoosh. The sound of something breaking through the air resounded in the sky like a rainstorm. That is, arrows. Reynolds could only understand this much. As for running away, it was already too late. The speed of the meteor-like arrow rain that came from the horizon had long surpassed the shooting of the shadow followers that Reynolds had used in the simulation battle. In other words, it was a shot that was above the level of a high-level familiar. Whether it was power, speed, or numbers, they were all superior to the shadow followers that Reynolds had used. In the face of such shots, Reynolds could only shrink his pupils to the size of a needle tip, as if he was watching a slideshow of death. In another second, the rain of arrows would pierce through Reynolds's body and tear him into countless pieces. A death crisis that was even more direct than when he was in the control room was coming straight at him. In the face of such direct death, would Reynolds have a way to resolve it? Magic? There was no time to use it. Avoid? With Reynolds' pitiful physical strength, it was simply unrealistic. If it was before the transfer of spiritual droplets, Reynolds would definitely not have the means to deal with this crisis. But now Reynolds had a trump card. Clang! A blinding light blossomed from the back of Reynolds's hand. Amidst the command incantation that looked like 3 interlocking rings, one of the rings suddenly faded and turned into a surge of surging magic power. Using this magical power, Reynolds issued an order. "Come to my side, my servant." This order became a reality with the support of a huge amount of magic power. So, With a clear shout, a black silhouette rushed out of the surging flow of mana like a bolt of lightning, blocking in front of Reynolds. Looking at this figure, Reynolds's eyes widened. Avina? In the harsh sound of the air breaking, meteor-like arrows pierced through the sky and fell on the servant standing in front of Reynolds in the center of the ruins. However, before that, a huge shield was raised, like a fortress, and received the incoming arrows. Clang! In the midst of the heavy bell-like sound, the arrows fell on the solid shield. Then, like a chain reaction, the arrows turned into a meteor shower and hit the shield one after another. Clang! 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 The heavy arrows and the solid shield collided with each other, causing a continuous sound. The power formed by the collisions caused strong gales to rise. The strong gales turned into wild gales. The wild gales stirred up gray waves. The gray waves turned into curtains, causing the pitch-black smoke to scatter in all directions, blowing away the surrounding sea of fire. Ugh! Under the onslaught of the choking smoke, Reynolds could not help but raise his hands to block in front of him. He tried his best to stabilize his body to avoid being blown away by the strong wind that was close at hand. It was only an arrow that landed on the shield, but it had already caused such a huge shockwave. This made Reynolds's heart waver a lot. Of course, this wavering was not only because of this, but also because of the changes in front of Reynolds. To be more precise, it was Avina's change. "Senpai, are you okay?" Holding the shield, Avina, who completely blocked the terrible arrows, stared at the front and didn't dare to relax while shouting at Reynolds behind her. In this regard, Reynolds not only didn't feel relieved, but he also wavered even more. "Avina, how could you?" Reynolds couldn't even form a complete sentence. Looking carefully, Avina, who was in front of Reynolds, completely disappeared from the white Chaldea uniform that he was used to. Instead, it was replaced by a set of purple armor like a tight skirt. The purple armor was tightly wrapped around Avina's body, outlining Avina's unexpectedly curvy figure. While firmly protecting Avina, it boldly exposed the front half of her shoulders and upper half of her thighs, giving a kind of awe-inspiring and sexy texture. After knowing Aina for 2 whole years, Reynolds had never seen Aina wear such an armor. Her figure was even more voluptuous than he had imagined. Not only did it make Reynolds's heart skip a beat, it also made him completely flustered. What made Reynolds even more shaken was, she actually blocked this kind of attack? It was superior to the continuous shooting of the high-level tamed monster. If this kind of continuous shooting appeared in the simulation battle, Reynolds dared to say that the hundreds of intermediate-level lizardmen he faced would definitely be killed in less than 10 seconds. This was not something that ordinary magicians could resist at all. On the other hand, although Avina had a decent aptitude for magic, her combat strength was not necessarily higher than Renault's. Now, even Reynolds was helpless. He could only use the command spell to summon his servant to deal with the attack, but Avina blocked it head-on. Chapter 577. The amazing defensive power, the never-before-seen costume, the terrifying magical fluctuations surging in her body, and the fact that she was summoned with a command spell all told Reynolds. Avina was the servant who had signed a contract with him. Avina is a servant? How could it be? Avina was obviously a human being. Why did she become a servant? No, it was not impossible. Could it be? Reynolds remembered a very important thing, and his face instantly tightened, and he clenched his teeth. Not knowing how many times Renault's emotions had changed in these few short seconds, Avina raised the heavy and huge shield that could hide her whole body high to block the astonishing shooting, while shouting at Renault again in the shockwave. Senpai. No. Master. Please tell me what to do next. Master. The new title from the mouth of the younger generation finally made Reynolds realize the current situation. That's right. In any case, he was now a master. Moreover, the unknown enemy also launched an attack on him, trying to kill him. If he didn't find a way to solve this crisis, no matter how many things happened, he wouldn't have a chance to delve into it. Only when he got out of the current situation, he could calm down and solve all the questions. Thinking of this, Reynolds took a deep breath and let his brain work again. Then, in response to this situation, Reynolds made an instruction without hesitation. Find a place to hide first. After calming down, Reynolds's first order was something like this. It was an extremely lousy thing. However, this was the most appropriate instruction. When you are faced with long-range attacks such as shooting and bombardment, the first thing you should do is to find cover. Reynolds raised his hand to block the incoming smoke, and shouted at Avina. Don't face the archers in an open place. Let's hide behind the surrounding buildings. This instruction was naturally met with an answer. Yes. Avina did not hesitate to put down the shield, turned around fiercely, hugged Reynolds, and at the same time, Reynolds had no time to react, with an amazing speed comparable to a bullet, carrying Reynolds, who was much heavier than her and the shield, rushed to the back of a nearby building. Bam 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 bam. Without any obstruction, the arrow pierced through the air and directly landed on the ground where Reynolds and Avina were standing a second ago. It shattered the concrete pavement and penetrated the hard rock. Like an explosion, it blasted away the asphalt road, causing it to shatter into pieces. In an instant, a strong gust of wind blew the smoke away. Cough, cough, cough. Behind the collapsed building, Renault, who was put down by Avina, couldn't help but cough. It seemed that Reynolds had inhaled a lot of dust from the impact just now. Are you all right, Senior? Avina held the shield in one hand and patted Reynolds's back with the other. Avina's worried voice, gentle actions, and clear eyes staring straight at Reynolds made Reynolds realize that no matter what had changed, Avina was still Avina. I'm fine. Reynolds shook his head and looked at Avina. As Senior. It was only then that AI Wayna seemed to realize that her outfit had become very revealing. The hand that was patting Reynolds on the back turned to block in front of her body. Her pretty face was also somewhat bashful. Looking at Avina, who shyly covered her body, Reynolds's tense face almost relaxed. At this moment, a meteor more dazzling than any of the previous shots streaked across the sky and landed on the building where they were hiding. Boom! In the violent explosion, the side of the building that received the arrows was ravaged and more than half of it was shattered. When Avina hugged Reynolds and rushed behind a building, the rain of arrows from the sky lost its target. At the top of a tall iron tower about a few kilometers away from them, a figure who was about to launch an attack stopped. You know how to find cover so quickly? A deep voice sounded from the figure's mouth. It was a man with dark skin, gray hair, and strange patterns on his face. He wore a battle suit and held a black bow tightly in his hand. It seems that the enemy has a calm commander. The dark-skinned man raised his angular face, revealing a pair of eyes full of vicissitudes and perseverance. Generally speaking, people who had such eyes were either extremely determined or extremely cold. However, this man seemed to be suitable for all of them. Unfortunately, although this judgment is correct, it's a bit hasty. The man stretched out his hand without the bow. Buzz. Amidst the buzzing sound in the air, red magic power surged in his outstretched hand like lightning. The next moment, the magical power caused a miracle and created a sword. The man put the sword on the bow. Beep! In the sound of an electric shock, the magical power surging in the sword turned into an arrow as if it was molting. The magical power on the arrow was rioting. As long as the cover is destroyed, there's nowhere to run. Under the cold declaration, the man released the bowstring in the torrent of magical power. As a result, the arrow turned into a meteor and shot toward its target in the distance with a loud bang, like the sound of a cannon. Boom! The explosion was deafening, making the tall building as if it was hit by a cannon. The side that was hit by the explosion was like a fragile building block, and most of it turned into fragments. Such a shocking impact caused the entire building to shake violently. Senpai! Behind the building, Avina rushed to Reynolds's side, raised a huge shield, and blocked the falling rubble. An astonishing amount of arm strength was displayed from Awina's body. Even the rubble that was comparable to rocks couldn't shake the shield in the slightest. When it landed on the shield, it bounced off. Involuntarily covering his head, Renaud, who was hiding under the shield, stared at Aina, who was seriously protecting him. His heart was a little complicated. Sure enough, Avina got the power and became a servant. Whether it was the defensive power used to resist the attack, the speed when rushing into the cover, or the arm strength that could withstand the rubble as heavy as a rock, it was not something that normal humans could have. Even if she used magic to strengthen her physical ability, it was extremely difficult to exert this level of power. Chapter 578. Therefore, there was no doubt that Avina had obtained enough power to be comparable to a servant and became an extraordinary existence. It's probably at the level of a high-level familiar. No. In terms of defense, it might have already surpassed a high-level familiar and reached the level of the highest-level familiar. When Reynolds was so silent, Avina spoke again. It's very powerful. To be able to make the arrow this powerful, the enemy is most likely a servant. Avina said with a serious face. If this continues, the shelter will be destroyed. Master, let's find another shelter and leave while hiding. That was Avina's judgment. However, Reynolds didn't take it. Since the opponent is likely to be a servant, it's impossible to hide and leave at the same time unless I can get rid of the opponent's eyes. Reynolds said so. If it's a servant, it's not impossible to jump back and forth between high-rise buildings. Under such circumstances, it was very difficult to dodge the opponent's powerful shots and escape at the same time. As long as the enemy leaped along the high-rise buildings along the way and continued to shoot, destroying the shelter, sooner or later, Reynolds and Avina would have nowhere to hide. At that time, the two could only rely on a shield to defend. What should we do? Avina cast her eyes on Reynolds. In those eyes, Reynolds saw the same trust as before, as well as something else. That thing made Reynolds's heart tremble. So, to deal with an archer, we can't keep a distance from the enemy. Either we have to get close to them and knock them down, or we have to get out of their sight and escape from their shooting range. Reynolds said so, while various tactics and strategies emerged in his mind. His eyes also swept around and carefully observed the terrain. This was a town that turned into ruins. There were a lot of shelters, and there was fire everywhere, which greatly affected the vision. As a sniping place, it could be said to be the worst place. However, the enemy was a servant, and it couldn't be judged by common sense. No matter what kind of shelter, the enemy could destroy it with arrows comparable to artillery. No matter what kind of camouflage, the enemy could use an unimaginable ability to grasp the enemy's position. The enemy may have some kind of supervision, even if it's a few kilometers away or even dozens of kilometers away. It's not easy to escape from the enemy's shooting range. Reynolds's brain was working quickly as if he was simulating a battle. Until Reynolds saw something. That's it. Reynolds's eyes suddenly lit up. Boom! Amidst a series of explosions, the building was unable to withstand the powerful shots and slowly collapsed under the explosive flames. That was the result after the dark-skinned man released the second powerful shot. This way, the archer, whose body was surging with magic, narrowed his eyes on the iron tower. The archer's skill was called clairvoyance. Such a skill could give the user supervision, and it was often used in reconnaissance. If he were to look from a high vantage point, the archer would be able to recognize the entire city and search for enemies. In addition, clairvoyance also affected the accuracy of the bow. Once he set up the bow, he could snipe accurately. Thanks to clairvoyance, he could shoot from a distance with accuracy beyond the human domain. In other words, any enemy that was targeted by this pair of eyes would not be able to escape. Of course, the prerequisite was that the enemy must be within his sight. Looking at the collapsed building a few kilometers away, the archer's expression suddenly changed. He's gone? Yes. The enemy was gone. Under the collapsed building, there was no sign of the enemy. The archer couldn't help but be surprised. And at that moment, whoosh! A gust of wind came from behind the archer. Without the slightest hesitation, the archer turned around and blocked the attack with the bow in his hand. Clang! With the sound of metal clashing, a huge shield suddenly came crashing down and collided with the bow. A strong gust of wind blew. Bang! Amidst the sound, the shield and bow that collided with each other bounced off each other in the fierce wind, causing the users of both sides to explosively retreat, creating a distance between them. The archer was speechless. Because he had already seen it. He didn't know when two people appeared in front of him. Are you the attacker? Waina, who was holding a shield, questioned the archer with a serious gaze and expression. She was on guard while questioning the archer. Reynolds, who was standing behind Avina, also looked at the archer and made a confirmation. Sure enough, the attacker is a servant, and the class is archer? Should I say it's expected? The only one who could do that was a servant. However, if the other party was a servant, then there was a problem. Who summoned you, and why did you attack us? You won't answer this question, right? Renaud said in a playful tone. Although I already have some guesses. Reynolds' words were so clear to the other party's ears. The archer's servant suddenly became silent. What's wrong? You don't want to say anything? Reynolds said very casually, you should be a servant that was summoned through the proper way. It's impossible for you to be a defective servant like Shadow, who can't even talk, right? Reynolds teased the archer. Although Reynolds said that, his heart was actually full of vigilance. The other party was a real servant, not a defective servant that appeared in the simulation battle. If he was careless, he was likely to be killed. Reynolds didn't want to face another crisis. Therefore, in the case of a failed sneak attack, he could only try to stall for time and find a countermeasure that was beneficial to him. Reynolds made such a plan and induced the other party to talk to him. As long as he talked, it was possible to get information and find out what was beneficial to him. And Reynolds' provocation seemed to be somewhat effective. It really surprised me. I didn't expect to be approached to this extent while occupying the high ground. The servant named Archer glanced at Avina, who was on guard, and then turned to look at Reynolds. How did you do it? Whether it's the sky or the ground, there's nowhere to hide under my clairvoyance. It's not easy to get close. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.